Hey everybody, happy Monday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today is Monday, February 21st. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon and I'm very excited about today's lineup on the show. We're going to get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Stephen Filoni, who is the head of products over at BlazeMeter by Perforce. And Alan and Stephen talk about some of the biggest challenges, biggest testing challenges in 2022, as well as some of the tools and methods that are needed to solve them. It is a great deep dive into testing, certainly an important part of the DevOps process and application development process in general. So definitely a great conversation you want to listen to. After that, Alan speaks with Kit Merker, who is the COO over at Noble 9, and they discuss the topic of service level objectives. SLOs are becoming so much more widely discussed as they do provide a clear path to delivering exceptional results, either for customers or for other users, by defining some clear reliability goals. So Kit and Alan discuss an update on the community, some use cases and best practices when it comes to service level objectives. Great conversation there. After that, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast, and this is part one of a two-part conversation that host Mike Jones has with Mike Kurnow, who is the CEO of Defiant Networks, and they talk about a wide range of topics, including what is happening in cybersecurity in this year, as well as automated devices and self-driving cars, new bills, and Log4j. So many great topics, and there's going to be a lot to unpack in this two-part conversation. So we'll run the second part tomorrow, but please do check out part one today. After that, we have the next installment of the Open Mainframe Show. This one is titled, the best DevOps for mainframe solution is Zoe. So the Open Mainframes Project Zoe is actually an integrated and extensible open source framework for ZOS. So in this episode, Alan and John Murtick, who is the host, they are the hosts, they're going to discuss some updates and milestones with several Zoe leaders, including Michael Bauer of Broadcom, Joe Winchester from IBM, and Billie Jean Simmons of IBM. Zoe's been around for a couple of years. It's always great to hear about the updates, and it's definitely a technology. If your organization is using mainframes, you definitely want to check this one out. I think it's going to help your organization. After that, we have our Something Old segment, and this is from the recent Predict 2022 event. This is a keynote presentation by Emmett Keefe and Thomas Crane. Both are from Insight Partners. They look at 2022, the new wave of technologies. What technology trends and software solutions will further accelerate organizations' transformation in 2022? Well, Emmett and Thomas give us the lowdown on it, what they're seeing in the space, particularly as it relates to DevOps, CI/CD, cloud, and cyber. There's a lot of great takeaways in this presentation, so I highly encourage you to check it out. After that, I'm back with the headlines, and then I have a conversation with Ohad Babrov, who is the CTO and co-founder over at Talon Cybersecurity. And Ohad and I have a great conversation about some of the untold dangers of web extensions and where they're headed in 2022. This is a really fascinating conversation. It really kind of made me start thinking about all of the extensions that I have on my web browsers and how they may be opening my computer specifically up to vulnerabilities. And if it's happening to me, I'm sure it's happening to a lot of other people. We don't really talk about the dangers of web extensions, so definitely want to check this conversation out, as Ohad gives us a lot of takeaways in it. After that, I've got the webinar's preview for you, and then we round things out with The View with Vizard, in which Mike Vizard speaks with Dr. Dennis Hackney, who is the head of industrial cybersecurity solutions at ABS Group. And they discuss Log4j shell vulnerabilities and how they are impacting industrial control systems. Really an interesting conversation, and definitely one very relevant in today's critical infrastructure, larger conversation around that. So definitely want to check that one out also. All right, that's today's lineup. It's a good one, folks. I hope you can stick around for the entirety, and we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, welcome back, everybody. Kicking off today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have a conversation between Alan and Stephen Filoni, who is the head of product over BlazeMeter by Perforce. They discuss some of the testing challenges that are ahead, or maybe even already happening in 2022, as well as some of the tools and methods that are needed to solve them. Great conversation, lots of takeaways. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV interview here. My guest for this segment is Stephen Filoni of BlazeMeter. I think it's BlazeMeter by Perforce. Is that correct, Steve?
That's correct.
Yep. And, for those who aren't familiar, of course, BlazeMeter was originally founded by a friend of mine, Alon Gromonsky. Great story around, one of the pioneers in open source testing and continuous testing. BlazeMeter was acquired, I guess it had to be 6 years ago, maybe more, by, at the time, called CA, or CA Technologies, Computer Associates. Then it always kind of operated kind of semi-autonomously. And then I guess it was last year, they found a great home with the folks at Perforce, who've also been around a while, and Perforce is, of course, a leader and have really expanded their capabilities from code repository to testing and so many other things. So it was a good match, BlazeMeter and Perforce, so we're happy to see it. Stephen, so I gave the BlazeMeter story, but I can't give the Stephen Filoni story. I need you to do it.
Oh, well, we'll need hours to give my story.
It was the short version.
So I've been in testing more or less for 20 some odd years. I came to CA, must have been 7 or 8 years ago. And I was part of the team responsible for acquiring BlazeMeter into CA. Mm-hmm. So, and I always had plans for BlazeMeter. And as you mentioned, it sort of ran autonomous inside of CA. And then CA was acquired by Broadcom. And then once we were in Broadcom, I was able to expand BlazeMeter to go beyond performance. And we added a multitude of features, virtual services, API testing, API monitoring, grew all that. And now as you said, we found a very good home with Perforce. And that acquisition happened right at the end of October of last year. Yep. But I've been doing product management work for, about 15, 16 years, almost exclusively in the testing space, a little bit in the mobile space, and a little bit in the monitoring space. And what's interesting is moving around, going from testing to mobile development and mobile testing, and then into monitoring. I now have all of that with Perfecto and BlazeMeter coming together at Perforce. So I have the monitoring, I have the mobile, it's all coming together. So everything I've learned over the years, I can make it all come together and work in one spot.
So give us your best Dr. Evil and tell us, isn't it great when something comes together like that?
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I hope to make $1 billion.
Absolutely. Good stuff, Steve. So, look, well, let's first of all, we've had the pleasure of talking to several of the BlazeMeter folks since the acquisition by Perforce, and it really does seem to be a good match. But what I wanted to kind of focus in on today is, maybe the state of continuous testing, if you will, and then a little bit of what's specifically at BlazeMeter, what's new, what's coming down the pike that we can be on the lookout for here.
Sure. So BlazeMeter historically has been a performance testing solution built upon open source, as you mentioned. And we play two different roles. We work with centers of excellence who are doing large, massive load tests, and then we work in a shift left world with agile teams. And we were noticing struggles when it came to testing. with the Agile teams. So when you're looking at continuous testing is, well, a continuum. So it starts off with the development and the Agile groups, works along sometimes into a full end-to-end testing, and then continues into production. And so if we talk about that continuum, we look down at the Agile teams, and we noticed that they were struggling. They weren't testing as much as they should. And we interviewed dozens of different companies to try to understand what were their challenges with this. And they were a multitude of challenges. One is they didn't like using multiple different tools to try to get all the testing done, whether it's a functional test, a performance test, an API test, unit test, all different types of testing. They're like, all these different tools, some have to be downloaded onto our devices, some are in the cloud. They all have different UIs, reporting. That's a challenge. And then another challenge was we don't have time to get data. I mean, think about it. When you're testing, you need data.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just data to run a test because, why can't you do that? Then I need data for the back-end system. And then I need data. If I don't have my full environment and I'm using mock services or virtual services, I now need data for that. How do I get all that data in and make sure it's all in sync? Because when I'm developing code, I have a very limited time to develop that code and get it out the door. And if I have to spend time trying to figure out, get all this data and sync all this data together, that's a challenge. And then, with that challenge, as I mentioned, I don't have my full environment. So now I need virtual services. Where do I get those? Who's developing those? And then I have to figure out what data did they put in. So the mock services, the virtual services, as well as the data, two big problems that are hindering people from getting their testing done. And then we have other issues around how do I generate my test? I just want to develop. I don't want to spend my time creating all these tests. So those are challenges there. And then on the flip side, if I'm trying to do continuous testing and I'm trying to continue the testing into production, what tests do I set up? How do I monitor? How do I test in production when I don't know what I tested? When there's not a full collaboration across the entire value stream, how do I know what to test in production? Who's creating those tests? You have your ops team, and are they monitoring or testing the same things that I wanted to test or that I did test in pre-production? So those are quite a few of the challenges that people run into when they're trying to do continuous testing and continuous testing at scale.
Absolutely. And emphasis on that scale. Because really that's where you start seeing the cracks. That's where you start seeing, when you're not at scale, sometimes you could muscle it.
Yes.
Right? Or fake it even. But when you start hitting scale, man, it's like whatever your weakest points are, they're going to just come right to the forefront. And you're going to say, "Oh my goodness, this doesn't scale." Right?
No, that's right. Because you can have like one group, one team, one service that's able to do something that's special, unique, and they can get that out the door in their own special way. But when you're trying to scale that, either that service or application has grown, or you're trying to scale it in an enterprise, it just, as you just said, all the cracks show, the whole thing falls apart.
Agreed. All right. Let's talk about what's new with BlazeMeter then. What are we doing to help?
Well, surprisingly, a lot of the challenges I just mentioned we're able to solve. Just coincidental.
I'm shocked.
I'm shocked as well. I mean,
right.
I didn't know this was coming. Yeah, so one of the things we actually just released on February 3rd was our BlazeMeter test data piece of BlazeMeter. And this combines the ability to, whether it's for performance testing, functional testing, API testing, we can generate the data that you need. And that data that gets generated is not just to generate the data to drive a test. We'll also generate the data, if you're using mock services or virtual services, generate the data for that as well, and generate data for a system under test. So, and the idea is all that stays in sync. And we'll generate the data at the time you want to run the test. So now you don't have to worry about managing, maintaining the data sets, you don't have to worry about that. We will generate the data on the fly and to run the test and to ensure that all that data is in sync. That takes away a lot of the false positives that you've seen in the past where things are failing. Oh, but it turns out it was the data in the virtual service, or the data on the system under test wasn't set up the right way. And so all that goes away and you don't have to put any thought into it.
Crazy. That's, it's crazy that no one's thought of this before or, kind of implemented this before when, it seems rather elementary at some level. Like, of course, if you want to do this. But, I had a conversation with the last guest here on Techstrong TV, and we spoke about the issue is a maturation issue, right? Until your DevOps processes, until your CI/CD processes are at such a level of maturity, right? You don't even run into this problem because you have problems that pop up before it that kind of take your focus away.
Correct. So in the past, what's happened is when you were handing it off to a testing team, the testing team was used to the problem and they had time to get the data. They had time to set up the data. They had gold copies of data sitting around that they would use. They were familiar with it. But as you're saying, the CI/CD process, the shift left process happens, the data problem, the virtualization problem is completely exacerbated because they don't have the time, they don't have the ability, they don't have the skill set, they don't have the desire to do all that. They want to get their code that they developed and they want to get that out the door as quickly as possible. And testing is sometimes seen as a hindrance. It's a necessary evil, going back to Dr. Evil, a necessary evil, if you will. And so anything that we can do to accelerate that and make it much easier for them, that is the challenge. So yeah, you could say, why wouldn't someone have done this whole data thing? There are synthetic data generators, right? There's open source synthetic data generators. That's fine, but that just generates the data in one spot. You still have to figure out how to take that, pull that out, put that here, put that there, put that there. And we're taking care of all that for you.
Got it. Very cool. Hey, for people who want to get more information on that, Stephen, where can they go?
They can go to blazemeter.com. So
just straight up right on the front page.
Yeah, just right on the front page. It's our newest part of our release. So you'll see it there. You'll see blogs. You'll see help. We have multiple discussions on it. Yep.
Very cool. Hey, we're coming up on time here. Anything else coming down the pike or you want to let our audience know about?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a few things that are coming down the pike, but one of the more interesting things that we are working on is one of the challenges that I had mentioned is generating tests. So they don't want to spend the time to even generate the test. And there's two things that come with that. One is just generating your API tests. So we're going to have coming soon an API test generator to help with that. And that is combined with our, synthetic data gen. So those two are combined together to help generate that. The next thing that comes, which is a natural evolution, is you don't just want positive tests. You need negative tests as well. And so that data gen is going to auto-generate negative tests for you. Whether it's negative data driving a test, putting negative data into your system under test, or having negative things happen with those mock services or those virtual services. So you want to delay a virtual service, you want to knock this virtual service so it doesn't respond, or just provide different types of data sets to see how well and how robust your system is. And once you do that, the next step is, all right, so I have negative testing. Then you combine the positive and negative together, and now you have chaos testing. And so those are coming down as well.
Cool. Love it. I don't want to hold your feet to the fire or make you say anything you're not supposed to say, but what's time frames on those, if you can talk about them?
Well, I'll say this: by the end of the year, you'll see this. I can't. Okay. I don't want to give solid time frames, but this year those will be coming out the door.
Okay, I think that's fair, Stephen. Hey, I want to thank you for coming on and updating, keeping us up to speed here on BlazeMeter, man. Continued success. We're hoping maybe at some point we'll see BlazeMeter at a real live conference.
Oh, I'm hoping to get to a real live conference. As much as I enjoy maybe not traveling as much, but the interpersonal interaction.
Yeah, no, we all miss it.
I mean, yeah, it's it's a must.
Absolutely, man. Hey, yeah. Steve Filoni, BlazeMeter, powered by Perforce here on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with another guest.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back. Next up, Alan is speaking with Kit Merker, who is the COO at Noble9. They're discussing service level objectives and what's happening in the community, as well as some use cases and some best practices related to service level objectives. Definitely a relevant topic these days, growing more in importance. So definitely want to check this one out. Let's go ahead and roll it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm really happy to have my friend Kit Merker all done up in his Seattle Kraken hat and his winter beard for the Pacific Northwest up there. Joining us today, Kit, of course, is the COO of Noble9, a recent winner of the DevOps Dozen Awards as best new company on the DevOps space. Hey, Kit, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey, Alan, great to see you.
It's good to see you again, my friend. I'm thinking, Kit, we may actually see each other in person soon.
Wouldn't that be great? Hopefully somewhere sunny. I can get rid of the beard.
Well, I'll tell you, I was just looking at airfare for Valencia, Spain for KubeCon. In May. I don't know if you guys are planning on being there for that one, if that's like a CNCF thing you go to or what, actually we have a roadshow coming up in Seattle at some point. I'm not sure when. We'll talk about that.
Well, in May, I'm not sure about KubeCon, but we will be having SlowConf, and we're doing it online this year again in May. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yes, I think I saw that. What are the dates?
It's May 9th through 12th.
Very
cool. It will be completely online and asynchronous and attend while you work, just like last year. So we'll have tons of speakers and all the fun from last year that we had, and hopefully even bigger. The CFP is open right now, so if you go to slowconf.com, you can submit a talk, and it's going to be exciting. And you guys covered we're a media sponsor last year, so hopefully we'll have you back.
Yes, we were. On the spot. I remember we'll talk about it.
All right.
So it works out well because I think KubeCon, if I'm not mistaken, is like May 16th.
Yeah, we intentionally didn't put it the same dates, so.
Yeah. So that'll work. Cool, man. Let's talk a little Noble9, though. You know, Kit, I guess we really should. I'm assuming everyone knows who Noble9 is, but I forget. You know, you still only have been around 3 years, and at most, and not everyone may be familiar. Why don't we back up and start there?
Sure.
Tell people about Noble9.
Of course. Yeah, so Noble9, we make a service level objective platform, SLOs. And the whole idea of SLOs is about measuring your observability system and bringing new context, shared context, so that you can make better decisions and better automation within your organization. So if you think about how you're pulled in all these different directions, right? Some people on your team say we got to ship features. Some people say, if we don't make it reliable, perfect, then we're going to hurt our reputation. If we don't fix our tech debt, we're going to burn out all of our employees and we'll have the great resignation to deal with. They're all getting pulled in all these different directions. And what's interesting about this is that we have actually more data about our software than we've ever had before. We have source control, we've got our AWS cloud, we've got our Kubernetes cluster, we've got all these observability tools. We have so much data, and yet we come to these different conclusions about what we should work on. And this is a big problem for so many organizations. So what Noble 9 is doing is we're bringing some additional context. This is what's really missing is people need to understand in an organization, what are the risks to the system? What are the expectations that customers have? And what are the trade-offs we have to make in order to deliver the right kind of service to our customers? So what we're doing with service level objectives in Noble 9 is we collect all this observability data. We add this context and we drive automation and decisions so that whether you're on call, you're planning your feature roadmap, or trying to justify your investments, you can see exactly what the impact is on the business, and everybody can start pulling in the same direction. And that's really what we're doing. And like you said, we've been around for a couple of years. We now have a product, in market. We both have a kind of a entry level thing called Hydrogen, and an enterprise class product that's being used by some of the world's largest enterprises, and it's very exciting, and we're having a great time.
Very cool. Yeah. Kit, when we look over the evolution of the last couple of years, right? Because I remember with Noble 9, right? We first thought of it around, this is an SRE kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And SREs early on were inherited a world of SLAs, right? Where it was, perform or, a quick bullet to the back of the head will work.
Metaphorically speaking.
But that wasn't a very forgiving model or a model that would really kind of foster cooperation and team building and, a lot of the principles behind DevOps, right? About how we get stuff done. It's very hard to have a blameless postmortem when if you blew an SLA, someone's job is on the line, right?
Well, it's really interesting because I think definitely in the sort of earlier, I would say, IT service model, right, where you have SLAs, especially if you have, maybe outsourced contracts, right? SLAs became really a form of punishment, right? One of the interesting things that I learned from sort of the Google SRE model is that there's an assumption of reliability at Google, an assumption of infrastructure investment that's not actually there in most enterprises. The SLOs that are prescribed by the SREs in the Google model are really trying to hold back overinvestment in infrastructure and this sort of gold-plated infrastructure problem. Well, most companies in the real world don't want to. It's the other way around. Their issue is they can't keep up with the reliability needs, and the feature pressure is really the issue that they have. And so with this SLO model and being able to define them, so in fine-grained ways across multiple data sources, being able to use it with automation, what changes is that you can start to put guardrails around these different conditions that people care about. You start to model the business. And this is really what we got to get to. It's about building the technology for digital business because all the businesses are digital now, right? And so your point about kind of like how do you adopt the sort of DevOps method and bring this to the table. I mean, really, DevOps is trying to get better at building software, become more kind of diligent and efficient, and make the right trade-offs. It's about ownership, right? A sense of responsibility, but not punishment. And I think once people realize, actually, I just had this customer from Flexera. We just did this testimonial video together, and he said this, like, once people realize that they weren't building SLOs to point blame at them or punish them, that we were trying to do it to help them, so that the people in the organization could see when they had problems, right? When they needed help, then people really got open to this idea. And this, to me, this is the game changer: is if we can help organizations become more transparent, to be able to do more through APIs instead of meetings, if you know what I mean, right? Like using the data and the systems to help make these better decisions. This is what changes culture, right? A lot of people want to talk about reliability culture and DevOps culture and agile culture. But that's actually a scary idea. The way I like to think about this, and what we've talked about with our customers and community members, is it's about how you make decisions together, right? And if you can make lots of decisions in a way that that is supportive of the strategy, supportive of the business, and also, the realities of the pressures that we're on as humans. And let's not forget that everybody's going through a hard time and maybe not totally happy being on call and all these other things. Taking all that into account and making a decision together. This is what becomes culture, not the other way around, right? You don't change culture first to get the decisions. You start making good decisions, and then the culture emerges from that. And it's, I think, a really important idea.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, no doubt about it. And it is, but, when we focus on DevOps, being about delivering software, and clearly that's the goal, right? Deliver software better, faster, higher quality. In order to do that, there's that whole culture thing, and some people say, culture's BS, It's not. Having a team that works together, had goals that are clearly enunciated, right? What we're all trying to do, what you understand what the guy or gal next to you is doing, right? And why they're doing it and how you fit into it. That's all part of that. All of those things help you get software better, faster, higher quality. And that's where it is. What's interesting about Noble 9 Kit is from where I sit, right? Because I sit, beyond being on different sides of the continent, I sit in a different chair than you. I get to look at the whole market, without a horse in the race, so to speak. You guys have done a really great job of defining and owning SLOs, right? I think for a lot of people in the marketplace, right, SLOs aren't necessarily synonymous with Noble 9, but you've probably done more to promote SLOs and their use and why they're beneficial than anybody else in market.
Well, first of all, I appreciate that a lot. I think it's a reflection of the community. I think it's a reflection of, a nerve that we hit at some level because, to your point, right? Goals that are, well enunciated. And it's funny to me because I think oftentimes we think of goals as things that are like kind of squishy, right? We set stretch goals. Oh, sorry. I thought I muted everything.
It's never all muted.
We're all muted. We want to set goals. Sometimes you're a little squishy is what I was saying. So it's like, maybe you have OKRs, maybe you have stretch goals, maybe you have some different perception of what the goal is for your service. And what SLOs are doing is turning it into pretty much the most precise type of goal you can imagine, which is code, right? Like actually describing it in code and something that's, checked in, where it's the truth. There's no arguing about what it is today. Now we can change it, right? We can always change our minds about what the goal is, but at any given point in time, there is a goal that's described, and there's a set of actions associated with that goal. And to me, this is exactly what is so attractive to people in the market about SLOs, because they're no longer guessing. They're no longer, sending each other Slacks and emails and writing documents and putting it in dashboards. They have a very precise way of describing what they want and expect from their service. That takes into account the risks and trade-offs and customer expectations that they have for the service, and then allowing the team to engineer to that goal, allowing the business to understand the trade-offs, right? Hey, if you want the service to be faster, we're going to have to spend more to buy more computing power, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, if you want these features, we're going to have to put these other reliability concerns on hold, and vice versa. That this is something that brings visibility to all the little, engineering decisions that are made on a daily basis, and then aggregates them up to the size of an entire enterprise, because it's bird's eye view of how the enterprise functions, and doesn't limit them to a prescriptive way. Because I think this is one of the other big challenges when I look at the observability space or anybody in infrastructure space that's trying to bring a prescriptive guidance. I think today's world is about the right tool for the job. Right? You got to fit inside of an ecosystem, whether that's, what language you use, what CI/CD system you use, what package manager you use, what source control you use. All of these things are choices that that engineering teams have to make for themselves. And you can't necessarily dictate that team A and team B are going to agree on that, that stack, if you will, right? You can give them some flexibility. But what you can get them to agree on is the concept of the service level objective. Like, what should my service provide to customers in terms of availability, latency, performance, throughput, whatever the characteristics are that deliver that end-to-end service. This is what becomes almost the contract. Because if I know, that I'm using your service and you're going to give me, X number of latency over, Y number of nines, then I can build my system to account for it. I can decide what my retry strategy is, what my caching strategy is, right? I can design and engineer a system that takes into account what your service is, says it's going to do. Well, that level of clarity allows engineering teams to operate in a completely fundamentally different way, because now they aren't guessing and they're not hoping and they're not wishing, right? They're working toward a clearly articulated goal. And I think this is what's so important. So now the whole idea of us promoting this concept, we're in love with SLOs. I don't know how else to explain it. We're just losing our mind about how amazing it is, but it is really about the community. We now have literally thousands of people that are involved in the SLO, the SLOConf community. We have the monthly meetups. The conference, as I mentioned, will be in May. And we're expecting, hopefully, about 5,000 people to show up this year. Last year we had 2,200 registrations. So we're pushing hard for this. But based on what we've seen in the market and the companies that are literally deciding if they're going to build or buy an SLO platform right now, there is a huge groundswell of interest in this concept to take their observability systems, their operation systems, their reliability systems to the next level. And all the practices and tools and techniques and tricks, everybody wants to share it and learn together, which is, I think, the most exciting thing. And it fits in with so many other areas: incident response and chaos engineering, and how we do monitoring and logs. All this stuff kind of fits into this whole story about SLOs. Even financial FinOps, right? Even cost management, all this stuff fits into this same story. So yeah, it's kind of overwhelming, to be honest, how much the market seems to have appeared and materialized over the last couple of years with SLOs.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Hey, Kit, we're up on the clock here. So you mentioned SLOCon. It's SLOConf with an F.com.
That's right. Yep.
And for people who want to maybe submit a talk or just find out more about attending this year's virtual conference in early May. And then for people who want to get more information on Noble 9, is it noble9.com or IO? I forget.
Noble9.com. Yep. NOBL number 9.com.
That's it. Hey, Kit, man, it's great seeing you. I hope to see you in person sooner than later here. But keep doing what you're doing, man. And congratulations on the DevOps Dozen Award as well.
Thank you so much, Alan. And hopefully we'll catch a hockey game together.
Come on down. Actually, I don't have Seattle Sounder tickets when they're playing the Panthers, but we'll look into it. I'll talk to you later, man. Great seeing you.
All right. Take care, Alan.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
All right, we are back. Next up, we have the Haunted Hacker podcast. This one features Mike Jones speaking with Mike Kurnow, who is the CEO of Defiant Networks. This is part one of a two-part conversation that the two of them have about a range of topics, including some of the cybersecurity trends they're seeing in 2022, as well as automated devices, self-driving cars, new builds, and Log4j. Very, very wide variety of topics there. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
Welcome to the Haunted Hacker podcast number. I don't know, Mike, what number do you want to give it?
Oh, shit. What was the last one? 199?
Something like that. We've had them in the 300s, 200s, whatever number you want. It doesn't matter.
Let's 69.
Okay.
No.
Any random number.
200.
All right.
Yeah. Nice and even.
Haunted Hacker Podcast number 200. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I am speaking this month for a group in the UK, also in South Africa for a CISO group. And pretty soon, I believe in March, Risk 360 is having me and Chris Roberts, Luke McComey, and Mike Weber on a podcast extravaganza is what they're calling it, I guess. Other than that, not a whole lot to report. Everything's going good. The group in general, the Haunted Hacker group, is growing. And I'm starting a business and a nonprofit, not related to the Haunted Hacker, except for the charity. But the charity is going to be Hackers for Vets. And we're going to raise money to get scholarships for different certifications to help transitioning vets get their foot in the door. And the consulting company I'm starting is going to be something completely different, something new. And I think you'll probably like it. Other than that, I don't have anything else. So today we have Mike Cornell. This is his second time on the podcast. Known friend, good friend of the Haunted Hacker, and a really interesting guy. So, Mike, what have you been up to since the last time that we spoke?
Yeah, so the last time that we did this was April of last year. It's been pretty busy. So my company, Defiant Networks, logo and here just complete the ensemble. We have been working on a massive undertaking where our initial goal was to create this awesome industrial networking service that allowed you to microsegment very easily, have cryptographic identities for all the devices on your network, allow you to segment, to do kind of unidirectional stuff as well if you needed to, bridge networks going from like layer 3 up or something. But we actually realized that the ingredients we had allowed us to do a lot more. And so we have built a lot more networking protocols to facilitate an overlay network for the entire internet. That can run services on it, kind of like the Tor network would. You can access things on it, and it is 100% completely zero trust in the means that your laptop or desktop PC, whatever, all the way to every single node that facilitates that communication circuit to the thing that you're getting to on this overlay network has to confirm their identities with each other. And this happens periodically. And every service that runs on each node will only run for nodes that have identified themselves. So we've been working on that since about April. Yeah. And we've got, we have alpha, we're in alpha right now. So we've got something working with Windows, which is a nice client. And then we are working on the same thing for Android. Can't say exactly when those will be out, but hopefully things have been going really good development wise, and we've also been working on some of the business stuff too. So hopefully we will be in beta with the public soon enough. I can't really say a timeline. Sometimes these things move, but yeah, I've been really busy with that. Ended up having a newborn in October.
Congratulations!
So thank you. Yeah, his name is Julian, after Dr. Julian Bashir, nice. Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Yeah, he's the smartest guy on the show, so I figured it's a great name. Cool for another son of mine. But yeah, I mean, really just those two things, but it's been a whopping undertaking between the two, and all good though, like all good stuff happening.
Cool. And then you lay on top of, on top of having a newborn and all the work you're doing, and taking a look at the issues that cybersecurity is having right now. And we talked briefly before the show about some of the stuff that we've seen and experienced. And we both have a laundry list of things that are pretty shocking and things that don't necessarily give 2022 a bright start, I guess. So, I know Log4j was a big thing earlier this year, well, beginning of the year and going into January. And it seems like, at first I thought maybe this is one of those vulnerabilities like Heartbeat, right? That was complex, but everybody was vulnerable to it. That people weren't necessarily going to be able to just click a button and gain access. But with this one, it appeared that way, but we're starting to see a lot more exploitation on a lot more unpredicted types of devices and networks, I think. Tell me about your experience so far with Log4j and some of the stuff that you've seen.
So dealing with Log4j from my perspective has been more so looking at it from kind of a critical infrastructure lens, right? Mm-hmm. So some stuff I do is working on civil engineering and critical infrastructure projects, mm-hmm. and creating security architecture that will eventually become a framework to carry out the most conducive deployment for a safe and secure industrial network deployment, or solution deployment, whatever the contract may be. And initially, I had just kind of looked at Log4j as another one of those, this is just like a software thing. Yeah, this is gonna, screw up your whatever desktop stuff, right? But really, it's extremely pervasive because of how ubiquitous Java is in a lot of things that are used, especially on the control side. I'll give a quick example. The Siemens CERT had on the 17th of this month, actually, so like 5 days ago, they published a document with their findings of all of their products that were vulnerable. And it is a long list. I want to say there's I've got it pulled up here. Just scrolling through really quickly here, it looks like, I want to say probably 45 or so, 45 or 50 products. And it's not an exact number, just, scrolling through, that's what it looks like to me, about 40 or 50 or so. And that scares me a lot because working in the industrial controls arena, I know that a lot of the update cycles of like a manufacturing plant or a major transportation system, that stuff takes a long time. Like it becomes a project. It becomes a project that has to be bid on. There's all this time to get someone that can do the work and vet those people and have all the interviews with them. And then from there, all the testing that has to go on, the redundancies that have to be built to keep the mission critical systems and functions running, so that you can do these updates without really making that big of a dent in the operational output of whatever that entity is or that target is.
Right.
And I think it's going to be around for a long time in the industrial space.
Yeah.
A second thing that also has been kind of keeping me up at night is connected vehicles. It's been recently documented. I think it was hold on, it was Trend Micro. Yeah, Trend Micro put out an article, one of their research articles, talking about electric vehicle supply equipment, which is basically like their charging stations. So electric vehicle charging stations can be, there's other ways to compromise it, but Log4j is now a gaping attack vector in a lot of these. That might be able to get updated more easily, but the fact of the matter is we don't know exactly what effect it'll have on vehicles, because newer vehicles, like the ECU network, the CAN bus network, most manufacturers and OEMs have done a good job with kind of segmenting the network and hardening it, but some older vehicles, not as much. Right. So it can be anything from like tricking the vehicle into thinking it's charged when it's really not. So you run out of charge down the road. I don't know, right? All the way to potentially having a detrimental effect on a different ECU that can control, like drive-by-wire functionality, or maybe some other kind of functionality of the connected vehicle. It's kind of scary because, again, manufacturers don't all do the stuff the same. The onboard networks. So, I think that'll be fixed much quicker. But the damage might already be done, and I don't even know.
Yeah. So that's the scary part, is not knowing, I think, is the hardest part. And we both know people like Alyssa Knight who used to focus strictly on that type of stuff, right? The connected cars and the automated systems. And it's funny, but kind of I guess in a really weird, twisted way, comforting that the predictions that I made for 2022 are not very far off already. You talk about, plants and Log4j and some of that stuff. My predictions for 2022 was infrastructure was going to be targeted. And so far, I've been on 2 incident responses, one for a law enforcement group and the other one for a transit company. So, already countries are using, and I say countries, and we'll dive into that later, but countries are using Log4j in very interesting ways to gain the foothold that they need in these infrastructure groups, which is scary.
Yeah. With, especially some of these that might be, or that are nation state backed, right? So they have the limitless funding or resources, to carry these attacks out. It just opens up a new vector for, international cyber war. I feel like that term is kind of cliche because it's used so much and means so many different things, but it's one more way for someone to fuck over someone else.
Yeah, totally. I think,
which is par for the course.
Yeah. And I think this year, I talked about, geopolitical issues globally causing more internet and technology issues and outages. And already we've seen Russia attack the Ukraine with ransomware, the Ukrainian government. And we're starting to see a lot more geopolitical tension globally, not just with Russia, but also with China and Taiwan, and places like that, in Cuba with the Havana Syndrome. And then you throw on top of that a really bad vulnerability like Log4j. We've seen vulnerabilities from that flared up during the pandemic when everybody started working from home, like VPNs. And you and I talked briefly about VPN and the issues that we have there. Why don't we dive into that a little bit on the VPN side of it?
Right. So I'm not as aware of any VPN providers or software specifically that is vulnerable to the Log4j specifically, but I think there have been some attacks, I guess, in the more contemporary timeline that their access point was be able to leverage VPN that was either improperly configured, or they were able to somehow, get the certificates necessary to access something they shouldn't be. But the things that have been sticking out to me with the VPN is, the newest, one of the newest things in the VPN news, VPN Labs, which was just shut down by Europol. Mm-hmm. They had seized all their domains and servers, basically shut them down because apparently they were working with criminals to. Now, I'm working with criminals, but they weren't taking action. Like, they were being asked to take action, be like, hey, be mindful of your shit. Some bad things are coming out of it. And these kind of raise a lot of questions to me about just the state of, current and future secure networking technology, because the way it is here in the US is that if the Glow Boys come up to you and say, hey, we need your stuff, and they subpoena you, it's like, okay, whatever, they're doing, stuff within the law to ask you, and you provide whatever documentation that's there, right? So you have to work with them, or else you get shut down, and then worse, there's some sort of legal action taken against you. It just raises a lot of questions of like the state of it. It's like VPNs are this solution. You just have like regular consumer VPNs to watch British Netflix and British Bake Off and all that shit. Then you have industrial VPNs, which are a little bit different. It's not the same kind of like category. However, the idea is still the same. That secure networking technology. VPNs, I think they're great for a sense of security. Right. But the fact is, you're really just moving trust from your ISP to a whole new entity, and that entity can see what you're doing. And any no logging policy is just that. It's a policy. You can just, turn on Zeek or Bro onto whatever interface, or consuming the consumer traffic. That makes sense, but that sounded weird. Yeah, and you can just run some kind of deep, do your own kind of like internal DPI and what's coming in, and you wouldn't be none the wiser. And I don't know, there's a lot of like kind of moral and ethical things that come into mind, where it's like, not only that, but then everyone can be using your VPN to do something bad. And then I started thinking, well, shit, why aren't ISPs getting dinged? Exactly. If that's really the case, because the internet is a great thing, and it's a horrifying thing at the same time. And yeah, it's like why doesn't whatever local ISP get dinged because I don't know, went on tour to do something or whatever. It's kind of a light example. I don't know. It's raised a lot of questions to me, and seeing Europol shut down this VPN Labs company, it's kind of a bit of a scary thing to think of as someone who runs secure networking infrastructure technology.
I mean, it's kind of shocking. It's kind of shocking too. Like, so I was living in Dallas, and there was a data center that I had some friends that had devices and stuff in there, and without any kind of notice, without any kind of documentation, the FBI walked into that data center in Dallas and literally took every server that was there, and didn't let them know why. There was multiple companies that were based in that data farm or whatever, that data center. But come to find out, I guess there was a huge organized crime ring that was being ran through that data center, and nobody knew about it. But guess what? Every server got grabbed, and it was because it was attached to the same network, and they wanted everything. They didn't want just specific devices. They wanted the whole thing. So this data center literally went under because of it, which, I can understand to a certain extent, but then walking in and shutting down somebody's business and their livelihood just because, there's a criminal or potentially criminals on that connection. I mean, I think you're right. With ISPs, how many times should the ISP have been shut down or servers warranted when I was younger? Probably most of them, because we were using ISPs to carry out bad shit for a long time before we even had the Tor network. But now, I mean, we all know that most of the Tor network, the exit nodes, there's a good number of them that are ran by federal agencies that, they don't have to take anything because you're going through their exit node and they can see it anyways. But I think you're right. That sets a really scary precedence where, law enforcement or anybody can just walk in and basically destroy an ISP or a provider based on something that could potentially be going on.
Yeah, and I think too that in that situation that you just cited, when they walked into the data center and yoinked all the servers I don't. And again, like this could happen a lot of places. I'm just not aware of it, and I'm totally open to that. If that's the case, but I feel like when it comes to any kind of like federal prosecution that I know of, it seems that they need a high success rate. Like whenever the federal courts or whatever are, they have like a 90% success rate. And if they think it's going to be below that, they just like, kind of shoo it off to like a local, court or something. In that case, they probably believe they had the vindication to do that. But at the same time, and they might have, right? Like they might have been correct in doing that maybe, but at the same time, think of all the information that they got from all the other services and business processes that they can now, look at, reverse engineer of all these other companies that have nothing to do with the services that were used for the crime ring that you said there. And that's the thing I don't like, that collateral, not just a collateral damage, but the kind of collateral effect in general. It's like, now I have all your stuff, even though you're no part of this, which means they likely, they didn't, they probably didn't subpoena these things, or they probably hit the data center itself, not just the company, which sucks because everything's in that data center. It is fair game. Everything in that data center is fair game. So, that's shit.
I mean, you really have to think twice about who your data center provider is, and this was a very young startup type data center, very small, handful of companies resided in it. So, I mean, someone didn't do their due diligence. Like the first thing I would have done was go to try to check out the data center and the people that run it and own it. Look at the Russian business network. That was an entire network of nothing but criminal activity. And I think we probably have some of those data centers still around that conduct that type of business. But for some reason or another, the feds or like you say, Europol or whoever are just not interested in that group yet, which, I don't know if you saw the video from the arrest of Revel, but to me, like that was so strange and it looked so scripted. And even if it wasn't, I think it was just a way for Russia to say, hey, we're kind of bending to what you want. And by the way, we have all these troops sitting on the border of Ukraine. How about just a little bit of, we did some shit for you, now you do some shit for us type of expectations. And I think a lot of that goes on in law enforcement and government, to be honest.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with that, especially with international governments too, right? Like I think of Five Eyes, where it's like
Australia, Britain,
US, Canada, New Zealand, and one other, I forget. It's Five Eyes. I can only remember Four Eyes. Get it, glasses. Hey. I can't. That's why I work in Python and C, because I can't see sharp.
Nice. I like that.
That's when I used to teach, that would be a joke that I killed for my students. because I'd say it a lot. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. So I think that kind of justification of cyber, shutting down cyber criminals, maybe there was another company of interest that was in that data center too, or, I don't know. But anyways, yeah, I mean, doing due diligence and some form of risk assessment on the data center that you're using, I think is important. I think on the flip side, there could have been the rationale of, hey, this is a young data center. They might not have a lot of the security maturity in there yet, so I can get away with some stuff. Right. But then if you were to go to a larger data center that's running, things from, like big Fortune 500 companies that aren't running their own infrastructure or just outsourcing some of that processing to different data centers or whatever, that might also be kind of like a fly under the radar kind of move as well. You just be careful with what you're sending out of that data center kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, there's different rationales. I mean, I could see either one working. It's just, that tells me from like my old days in PSYOP, we would have a process for, like we would collect propaganda, and then we'd have a process to analyze it. And there's been two processes. There's been MARCO and SCAME. MARCO is just an acronym that means media, audience, response, content, observed effects, something like that. I normally use SCAME, which is a source, content, audience, media, and then the effects of that, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea being, whenever you get a piece of propaganda, you analyze it to try and get into the head of the people that are putting it out there. Right. And so to me, that these cyber criminals that you were talking about likely did not have a lot of, a whole lot of technical juju going on there. And we're like, well, it's just going to be easier if we, do this immature data center versus having to really, dot our Q's and cross our P's with a big data center, right? So, yeah, kind of that, psychological reverse engineering to an extent. But
I know they used to use like now a lot of the attackers will use AWS and stuff like that to host malicious code. Back in those days, I think a lot of it was try to find the cheapest data center, try to find the cheapest ISP that won't rat you out. But even some of like the Log4j that I'm seeing now, there was one that I was doing some investigation on this week. And one of the IP addresses that the machines were calling out to was hosted on AWS, and it was malicious code. And I know from experience that AWS doesn't necessarily do a whole lot of checking when it comes to what's being hosted on their platforms. I may or may not know somebody who had some malicious code up and running reverse shells for months without Amazon even picking it up. But I would hope that as time goes by, things get a little bit more, comprehensive when it comes to looking at code and looking at things that are hosted, not just on AWS or ISPs, but also like Google Play Store and the Apple Play Store.
Yeah, and so doing a little devil's advocate here, the more comprehensive with the monitoring or the kind of stuff that like AWS would be doing. I think right now, like, I don't really know like what their privacy policy is, and something I should probably read at some point, but I've worked with AWS before, not so much now, so it's not a prevalent thought in my head to do so, but it could just be that really they're just monitoring the network IO. Right. And that's what indicates something. I would be livid if I was hosting something on AWS that's running, proprietary code that I write for business reasons, or code that is written by us for business reasons and running on AWS or something. I'd be pissed if I knew they were looking inside that. Right. Now, I do know that AWS does have like control mechanisms. I forgot what the hell it's called, but it's a thing that allows you to there's a agent in the instances that you spin up. And there's that kind of hook into the instances that the UI has. So you can stop, start, restart, reprovision drives, yada, yada, that kind of stuff, right? Even that is scary to an extent because you don't know what else they're doing, right?
Right.
I mean, granted, you can just turn that thing off, but then it disconnects it from the UI and, you're stuck SSHing into it and then not really having a path of recourse if you accidentally brick the fucking machine or something.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I still think a little bit scary if they were to be looking in the machine, but I think more maybe some additional measures into the network monitoring to see what's going on. I think they have that down to begin with, though.
Yeah.
I'd imagine so for a freaking huge hosting provider of that magnitude. But yeah, I mean, there's many ways too of just making traffic just look negligible. Right. Innocuous interactions aren't really going to bring up red flags, and so you get to this weird area of like what's in the meta and what is normal baseline for that node or not. It's the stuff like that. I don't really know the efforts and they can go through and the money they can spend to really dedicate to that, though. I'm not sure.
All right, we are back. Next up, we have got the Open Mainframe Show, the latest in the ongoing series. This one looks at Zoe, which is the best DevOps for mainframe solution. It recently won that category in the DevOps Dozen Awards. So in this episode, hosts Alan Schimmel and John Murdoch will discuss some of the updates and milestones with several Zoe leaders, including Michael Bauer from Broadcom, Joe Winchester from IBM, and Billie Jean Simmons from IBM. So if you are not familiar with Zoe, the Open Mainframes projects, Zoe is an integrated, extensible open source framework for the ZOS environment. So if you got a mainframe, you want to do open source, Zoe is your technology. So let's go ahead and roll this now.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Open Mainframe, brought to you by us here at Techstrong Live, Techstrong TV, as well as the good folks at the Linux Foundation Open Mainframe Project. For those of you who have not seen this show before, it is a monthly show where we examine topics involving the open mainframe, open source in the mainframe, how it interacts in today's modern development and operations DevOps world. So much going on for it. My co-host John can give you, and I'm going to ask him to when I introduce him, to give you a brief overview of the Open Mainframe project at Linux Foundation. But before we do that, let me introduce you to first our panel for today's show. Joining us all the way from the UK is Joe Winchester. Joe, welcome to the Open Mainframe video.
Hey, Alan. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Nice to have you here. Joe, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Winchester, and I sound English and live in England, which is a bonus. My background, I work for IBM, International Business Machines, in case some of you don't know the full acronym. I've worked for them for about 25 years. I've worked on a number of open source projects. I was actually hired by IBM to work on tooling. I've worked on Java, which is a very successful open source language. I've worked on Eclipse, very successful platform. Now I'm very excited to work on Zoe, which we'll hear more about later.
Excellent, excellent. Next up, let me introduce you to Billy Simmons. Billy, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me.
So a little your background maybe?
About me, I work for IBM. I've been with them for about 4 years and working with the Open Mainframe project, Zoe project for about 3. And I am the Zoe Explorer Squad lead, and we'll talk more about that when we get to it.
Fantastic. Welcome and thanks, Billy.
Thank you.
Last but not least, we have Michael Bauer. Hey, Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm Michael Bauer. I'm a product owner at Broadcom working on our mainframe modernization and DevOps solutions. I've been working on the mainframe for about 6 years now. Originally, I was part of the original team that developed the Zoe command line interface, which we'll talk more about later. It was originally developed as a tool to help us test our mainframe applications that we were developing in-house. But then we realized there was an opportunity to work with IBM as well as Rocket to debut Zoe a few years back. And today I'm a member of the technical steering committee of Zoe and also the Zoe command line interface squad lead.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michael. Welcome. All right. I said last but not least, and that's it for
now the last after the last.
Right.
Yeah.
Not really the last, no. My co-host for the Open Mainframe project, he also, when he's not doing this, spends some time as the manager of the Open Mainframe project at Linux Foundation, John Murdoch. Hey, John, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. New year and great to be jumping back into some great episodes here. And yeah, I mean, the Open Mainframe project is really become that epicenter for open source in the mainframe community, across various different operating systems, whether it's Linux, ZOS, but also we're starting to see just in technology areas that are just directly in the mainframe sphere, such as COBOL. And one of the real flagship projects of the Open Mainframe project is Zoe, which I was looking, and I believe it was 3 years and 1 week ago today, Zoe 1.0 hit. That's for people listening in the audience, now you'll know the day we recorded. But, we've seen a lot of stability and a lot of great milestones that have started to happen here. And I'm really excited to see this conversation.
Absolutely. I have to tell you all on a personal note, when we first started doing the Open Mainframe project, probably was it 6 months ago or more, 7 months ago, John, the monthly shows?
I think we're almost getting close to a year.
Yeah, no, maybe it's more, you're right, 9-10 months ago. I thought, quite frankly, it would be all Zoe all the time, right? Because Zoe is such a rock star among the stars of the Open Mainframe project. Surprisingly, I don't know if we've done that many shows dedicated to Zoe.
This is our second one, I think. I think we did one early on and now this one.
Two things. Number one, I think it was done on purpose on our end because there is a perception in the marketplace that the Open Mainframe project is all Zoe all the time, right? That's the only project within this umbrella, and it's not. There's, what was it, John, 20 something or 19 something?
Yeah. I mean, we have a ton of projects going on here in just various different areas. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've had a chance over the last year to kind of shine a light on some of them that don't get the buzz, that don't get the spotlight that Zoe has attracted in just 3 short years. So, it's a pleasure to actually be doing this show, though, and coming and focusing on Zoe a little bit and bringing it to light for people. I would also mention that, here at Techstrong and at, DevOps.com, we've been running the DevOps Dozen Awards for the last, 6-7 years. And we always have a category in there for best DevOps mainframe solution. And there are many great mainframe solutions that are aimed at the DevOps market. The folks at Broadcom do a great job. The BMC, the IBMs, the Rockets, and and more, right? All have great solutions aimed at a DevOps developer and DevOps audience on mainframe. But this year, for the first time, Zoe won the award as best DevOps solution mainframe, and it was great. It was great to see. It was great to see an open source solution like that win number one. It was great because we do this show, and I was happy for the open mainframe project. But I also think it really talks about how important in just a few short years this has become. I guess what we should do is to kick things off. We probably have people watching this, whether it's on Techstrong TV or standalone or over our Techstrong network, who maybe aren't even familiar with the Zoe project, right? We talk about it here like it's a household name, and in some circles maybe it is, but in others it's not. So who would like to go first and really kind of say, okay, this is what the Zoe project is, and maybe a little bit of history on how it came to be?
Hey, Alan, I'll have a stab at that. That's okay?
Sure.
And then Mike and Billy can chip in. So I remember when Zoe first started, there were three things we wanted to get right. And the three words, you still see them if you go to zoe.org: open, simple, and familiar. And those are our kind of grounding principles. So open source, open everything, I suppose. It's not just open source. I've worked on projects like Java before where we open sourced code, but it was still hard for other people to collaborate, to contribute, to engage in a decision-making process. Some of the governance of other open source projects occurs behind closed doors. As much as possible, we open up every single window and door we can, not just for the code, but for the entire process, real 360. I think that's been a success, and I'm very proud of that, and others are as well. Simple. The mainframe always had this perception of being complicated, difficult. You had to drive a green screen. You either had to have lots of gray hair or no gray hair to drive it. So we're trying to demystify and simplify the mainframe. You'll hear a bit more about that from Mike. And the familiar is a very important. When I first started working on the mainframe, so I'm 55 now. When I first started working, I was about 15 years ago. I was kind of the youngest person around my lab. Now I'm the oldest person, right? The generation of folks coming up are younger. They are taught at universities and colleges with other development tools like Visual Studio, IntelliJ, and things like that. And we want to make sure that they understand technology like Jenkins and things. We want to make sure that when they see the mainframe, they don't see it as this antiquated platform. They see it as something very fast and modern and that they can just connect to and stay in their comfort zone. So for me, that's the Zoe project. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. A thing to add in addition to that is extensible, right? So Zoe's a platform that other vendors can extend it. We also have conformance programs to make sure that all the plugins and extensions into the Zoe project are compatible and users have a consistent experience. A lot of this has been enabled on mainframe by the emergence of REST APIs on the system. And as these REST APIs were developed, Zoe offers a number of solutions to manage those APIs and to leverage those APIs. The first is Zoe API mediation layer. So you may have a lot of APIs becoming available at your shop. You want a single means to manage those APIs. API mediation layer provides that solution. And then on top of the API mediation layer, we have a number of Zoe clients. So we have the Zoe command line interface. And a lot of times when I'm talking to folks about the Zoe command line interface, the initial impression is going back to a terminal. Why would you do that? Well, first, it's a very familiar experience to cloud developers. So if you're running in a hybrid cloud environment, pulling mainframe into that ecosystem is just like pulling another server or another cloud provider platform into that ecosystem. And the power of a command line interface is that I can quickly explore what services are available, and then I can easily abstract basically those basic building blocks, those individual commands, into more complicated and complex scripts to accomplish more meaningful tasks, more meaningful use cases. And then on the visual side, as Joe mentioned, and I'm sure Billy will expand on, we have Visual Studio Code as a text editor of choice that has integrations to allow you to work with different mainframe services, different mainframe products from your IDE of choice.
Sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'd like to add on, as the newest mainframer on the panel, only, dabbling with mainframe the past 3-4 years, and, right out of college, getting thrown into the green screen. It's been really exciting to work with Zoe and create those applications that can be used in familiar editors, and then the web application. It looks great. It's just like sitting down at your Mac, and then it also has capabilities for your more advanced mainframers that are used to the green screen. That's still there for them and everything. It's a great project, and I'm excited to work on it.
Excellent.
I think
Billy, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, you go, Michael.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think these solutions, especially like Zoe Explorer for VS Code, have really allowed folks coming out of university or still in university to get a hands-on experience that's very familiar to them when working with the mainframe. For example, we were talking about the different open mainframe projects, and another project that's really hit it off is the COBOL programming course. And we use a lot of the Zoe software in that course. It's the interface through which our learners are accessing the platform, are learning COBOL. They leverage the Visual Studio Code Zoe Explorer, and they also leverage the Zoe command line interface.
Yeah, and another great thing about that command line interface is your web help. And then, because not everybody can remember all the commands, you just put that tag in their web help and you get a whole list of commands that'll help you out so you can get done what you need to get done.
Yeah, and Alan, the education is really key here. So I've worked on a lot of open source projects that have great technology and haven't made it into the mainstream, or perhaps they've withered and died because they haven't really caught on. If you think back to a model of, perhaps, Microsoft Windows versus OS2, for those of us who are old enough to remember that, right? The way you make your technology become pervasive is you make it available, right? You pre-install it, give it to students, children at school, so on and so forth, right? And the Open Mainframe project did a phenomenal job here. It was, John might know a little bit better. It was around when the pandemic kicked off. I think the governor of New Jersey, there was this call for COBOL. It was like, COBOL's broken, the world is broken, we need to fix it. And rallying around that was this very successful Open Mainframe project COBOL education course. The bedrock of that course is taught using Visual Studio Code. So, Billy's generation and folks who are already familiar with that can just install it and work as though they were working locally. And that's so phenomenal. And another quick thing about education for me that was a real milestone, a real tipping point. IBM ran it's free, it just happens to be hosted by IBM, a student learning course, Alan, called Master the Mainframe. For the last 15 years, it was always taught using green screens to students worldwide. I think 27 different countries, I'm going to get the year right. Billy will correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 2021, or maybe it was 2020, was the first year that they moved. So it's 100% taught using Zoe technology. 25,000 students worldwide did that course. A record number completed it, and they all learned. So what we're seeing now with big enterprise customers, big enterprise companies, these students are now joining them. They're bringing this knowledge, they're bringing those skills. And then that's really sort of slowly turning the dial. So that excites the heck out of me.
No, it excites all of us, right? There was a time where we thought, we'd have to shut down the mainframes because all the COBOL programmers were dying.
Hopefully you weren't that journalist to predict that one.
No, it wasn't me. I stay away from those kind of predictions. I stay away from predictions in general, actually, because
I'm with you.
They have a way of coming back and biting you.
True.
I mean, certainly, as Joe brought up here, John, the COBOL program, for education, and we did do a show on that a couple months ago, has really been a smashing success. Billy, you are kind of the poster child here on the panel for that, right? And I'd like to kind of understand. I mean, is that what set you on this path? How did you, recent college grad, how did you wind up here?
Me personally, I went to a IBM hosted hackathon and placed and interviewed and was hired pretty much on the spot before I even graduated. I had no idea what was in store for me, and they stuck me in mainframes. So the first, few months I was onboarded and everything, I just kind of crammed all the education that IBM provides. I even did master the mainframe on the green screen before it was Zoe centric and everything. And I just, continue learning that way.
So you didn't go to school saying, I want to be a mainframe expert.
No, I'd never thought of mainframes. I wanted to be a programmer, and I really enjoyed it. I like solving puzzles and problems and stuff. So, but, I started learning more about the mainframe and kind of just jumped on that. And it's really cool, to know all the stuff that's run by mainframes, your airports, your banks, everything. And I kind of have a hand in some of that. And especially with the Zoe project, I have a hand in helping the developers that actually build those programs and keep the world running.
Yes, they do. Hey, Michael, I suspect, in terms of your position on the steering committee and your background, you've had a hand in this too. What do you think?
I've actually had a similar experience to Billy as far as my background getting started. So I got started on mainframe back in 2015. And when I joined Broadcom, which was CA Technologies at the time, we go through an extensive training program. And we learned about the tools of the trade, which at the time were, ISPF, 3270, writing rec scripts, writing JCL, but doing that all on the platform. And a lot of this tooling we have today wasn't around back then. So I got to see it sort of firsthand evolve from where it was to match what I had used back in university to develop different distributed applications and things like that. And then in addition, now with that training program, just as it's in Master the Mainframe, it's also in that training course at Broadcom. So you're starting to see more and more folks get trained on the system. And a lot of times we'll save it for the end. We'll have them learn, the typical tools of the trade from the past, and then we'll show them this at the end. And a lot of times I get the reaction like, why didn't you tell me this earlier? So it's a bit of excitement to end the program, and they get to use, the tools they were familiar with. I still think it's valuable to learn the tools of the trade, so you have history, and then also there's particular things you may need to navigate to the mainframe from time to time to do on the platform. But with a lot of these APIs and CLI plugins, you can drive a lot of mainframe actions from off platform, integrate with tools like Jenkins. I know that was mentioned, and I think that's a big reason that this won the best DevOps solution, is because it allows you to pull mainframe into those hybrid enterprise DevOps pipelines. And it's just another platform where the code has to live, just where the system of record may be. But you can drive those processes from, all these modern distributed development tools that are available.
I love it.
I love it. So, and much like Joe, I will tell you, I get excited when I see younger folks. Well, they're all younger folks to me these days, except maybe Joe. But I think we're contemporaries. But it is exciting to see all that. Billy, I got to ask you, what exactly is Zoe Zoe Explorer Squad Lead?
I help lead the squad, and we refer to our teams as squads within the Zoe project. And I was just recently, nominated with a coworker of mine. We're kind of co-leading, so we got a little power team going on. And we just try to keep everything straight. Right now, we're just focusing on the V2 release and the V2 conformance and everything. Going to bring a lot of really good stuff out there with the CLI platform and their new config files. And Zoe Explorer, they have their own APIs, that we can share with our extenders. We have the FTP extension, so that allows users to connect with the FTPS using the same VS Code extension that Zoe sits on. And then built on top of that, Zoe also now has the Kix Explorer. So you have that one and can, run all your Kix programs and your Sysplexes and everything. And that's out there on the marketplace now. And all these extensions are connected to the Zoe Explorer through those APIs. And it just allows a nice, seamless user experience.
Fair, absolutely. So, kind of cat's out of the bag. We're talking about Zoe V2. Anybody want to talk about dates, when people get their hands on it? What are some of the other highlights? Mike, I'm going to turn to you. You're the steering committee guy, right?
Yeah, I'm excited. I always like talking about Zoe V2. So a couple key dates. Right now, we're working through updating the conformance programs I mentioned earlier. So there will be a new conformance program rolled out for V2. We're looking for folks to apply early for conformance, looking at the beginning of April. And then V2, we're looking to make GA as a long-term support version towards the end of April, about April 25th is the target date today. You asked about a couple of new features. This is more what I like to talk about. So we talked about team configuration. A lot of times when you're using client technologies and connecting with servers, whether they're mainframe or cloud-based platforms, there's difficulty in configuring those clients. You have to know host addresses. You have to know what port services are running on. A lot of that's very simplified with Zoe for two reasons. One, we leverage this Zoe API mediation layer, which allows us to just specify where that's running and then automatically be able to connect to the services underneath. Another is this new approach to client configuration that Billy mentioned. So in V1, we have this concept of profiles, which is, say you're using a particular plugin, maybe that's the Kix plugin. You define the connection information to that particular server and you move on. But we've scaled in Zoe in that we have a large number of conformant plugins. I think as far as like conformant apps, plugins, extensions across the ecosystem, we're approaching 75. So we needed a better way to manage that. And we needed a better way to allow users within organizations to simply get started. So now this is all maintained in a single file that an administrator can maintain at a site. And then they just roll this file out to each one of their developers, each one of their system programmers, and they can just get started using the Zoe Explorer and the CLI. It's a shared config file. And for me personally, I use a large number of CLI plugins, talking like 12, 13, 14 plugins. If I had to define the connection information for each one, that's somewhat of a non-starter. And when I'm sharing this with others in my organization, or also as part of the Open Mainframe Project COBOL programming course, now I can just drop them a file and they can get started. That's one of the major challenges that's addressed in V2.
Sounds like a lot of maturation more happening within it. I mean, it's not novel stuff, but it's as you started to go through. Yeah.
Yeah, John, it is. Yeah, Alan, Mike's absolutely right. We were trying to net it out, John, into one word, and we basically. So, the crossing the chasm, the adopters curve of any technology. I think we saw a survey recently across all mainframe customers, a representative that said 19% last year ticked a box that said they've adopted Zoe. That's up in 2021. It was 10% in 2020. So it's a nice doubling. That 50% also ticked a box, or maybe it was the other 30, but by the end of 2020, this year, we're looking at 50% of customers saying we're going to have adopted it. So John, you're absolutely right. We just wanted to make it enterprise ready, right? So when Zoe version 1 was first introduced, after it was introduced in a non-breaking way, we introduced support for certificates and key rings, high availability, so your endpoints don't go down as much, what's called Sysplex awareness, running bits of Zoe in a container, either through Docker or Kubernetes orchestrated, but they were kind of bolted on in a very clever way, but they weren't really built in. Now with Zoe version 2, because we have the ability to change our APIs, they're much more built in from the ground up. So it's much more enterprise ready. John, you're absolutely right. Everything that Mike talked about and everything, we're really kind of ready for the enterprise, ready for that next 30% of customers to come along to Zoe.
And that's awesome to hear. And just the doubling of customers, or the doubling that percentage year over year, is fairly impressive. And I think, folks in the audience, you may not, be able to appreciate this as much of just I don't want to say just sort of, everyone knows enterprise software and enterprise deployments are complicated. You turn that up to an 11 with the mainframe because of the importance and criticality of these machines. The scrutiny of software getting on there is extremely high. And just starting to see that growth is pretty impressive. One thing I've always been curious, so, you have that 19% of people that are using in some way. What are some stories? Like what is the use cases that you're starting to see that enterprises are using it for?
I see a lot in the DevOps realm, whether that be providing integration tests as part of a CI/CD pipeline on a particular application. A very popular one is leveraging off-platform static analysis tools like SonarQube to scan changed application code. So if you're going to change a piece of COBOL, you might want to run that through a scanner for a quality check. And that's a popular use case because that's easy to centralize as part of like a DevOps center of excellence team, and then roll that out across applications. Testing is being done. It's a little bit more, how do I want to say, time consuming because each application needs to write those tests. And then also deployment pipelines. So maybe you're using some, source control management tool on the mainframe, and you want to automate the deployment of packages into a particular test environment or even into, a production environment. A lot of those things can be automated, and I'm seeing that as well. But primarily more on the dev side of DevOps with the, scanning of source code. That's a very popular use case.
It's an interesting one. I've not heard of that, but that makes a ton of sense. And I'm glad SonarQube supports COBOL. That's great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, you were going to say something there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just like to throw in, and then I'd like to just so I talked about open, simple, familiar being our kind of grounding principles. We always question when we're doing something, do we pass all three? We came up with a phrase called all of the old with all of the new. So on open source projects and modernization projects that I've worked on that have failed, and I've worked on a few, they only appeal to one generation. The mainframe has a very diverse generation. We can just see today from Billy all the way up to myself and Mike and others. So one of the things that I've seen, and I was talking to 2 customers earlier this week, they have older, more experienced people who've laid down a vast, library of job control language, recs, scripts that do very clever things. And what they're doing now through Zoe, and Mike talked about this with APIs and Billy with the Zoe Explorer, they're allowing that newer generation to kind of orchestrate and manipulate this great legacy of stuff that they've got. So we appeal to all generations and all skills. That's something that I don't know, Billy, if you want to comment that, but I see that with Zoe a lot. It hits a sweet spot.
Here recently, I've been seeing a lot of Zoe being brought into the cloud. And so to make it easier for developers and everything, just a simple container that can be distributed out across the enterprise, and everybody's set up, ready to go and get coding. There's not a whole bunch of clients set up and stuff to install and getting the environment correct before you can even get started. It really helps with the learning curve, and just cuts down on that time that enterprises need to put aside just for people to set up their environments and get going.
Fair enough. I'd like to bring up a topic, and that is, look, we have 2 folks from IBM on the panel today. We introduced you both. And when we talk about, Zoe and the modern mainframe, there really is only one platform. It's the Z90 platform by IBM. But what I think one of the big success stories of Zoe is that though IBM is a huge supporter, a huge contributor of Zoe, the fact that it's under the auspices of Open Mainframe Project and the Linux Foundation kind of removes the barriers to this. I'm not going to help my friend of my friend is my enemy, or the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That whole kind of dynamic that for too long plagued, cross-industry initiatives like this, right? I think you couldn't have a Zoe without a Linux Foundation, right? You couldn't have, Open Mainframe.
I agree, Alan. Yeah, it was very, very important. The Linux Foundation have done a phenomenal job. Yeah. When I talk to customers, and the same is true, one of my very first slides, I go in, I say, look, this is the Linux Foundation. When I point to the Linux Foundation, the other projects that it's a steward of outside OMP, people see, Node.js, OpenAPI. They see, what other projects does LF have? The CNCF,
Kubernetes.
right? Yeah, Kubernetes, right. So they get, and they see Jenkins, and they get in their mind, they go, okay, this isn't some kind of like, playgroundware software, right? This is open source, ready for the enterprise. And you're absolutely right. And when you talked about IBM, Billy and I are both from IBM and Mike's from Broadcom. When Zoe first started, there were three most companies involved. We had Rocket Software as well. The Zoe Conformance Program, as Mike talked about, is where vendors can apply and certify that they have an extension that operates in an API way, and then they get a badge and they get some marketing kudos. I think right now, John, the list of vendors, diversity of vendors, is like 7 or 8.
Yeah, we have a fair amount of different ones, both small, big, kind of all over the place.
Right, BMC, ASG, Phoenix. Apologies if I get the names wrong because I'm recalling them from memory. But these are other players that have come along, and without the LF being there, they would have said, this is an IBM controlled project, or this is a Broadcom controlled project, and they instantly would have perhaps. So, John, kudos to you. I mean, you do a great job at growing that diversity of vendors. It's really important that we have that. Yeah.
Well, it's all thanks to a community above it and the ecosystem. And, the projects you mentioned, like Kubernetes and Node.js, I mean, those are large scale projects, but what we see is that they build ecosystems. Like that's sort of the business that we're in is building ecosystems, bringing these diverse vendors together, competitors, which, in one respect, some people think of, geez, you bring competitors together, it's all stalemates. But the reality is that's when you drive the innovation. Like that's when we see projects are the most innovative, when it's competitors at the table. And what you start to see downstream is exactly what you said, conformance programs to help sort of define the vendor ecosystem. Last year was launched a support conformance vendor program, which IBM and Broadcom were the initial two, and we're going to see that grow. But that's, giving customers a way of saying, okay, I'm going to standardize on Zoe. I know there's this ecosystem of tools that I can leverage. I know there's these set of vendors that I can work with that can provide support. And that's an amazing, 1-2 punch. And I know the other thing that Zoe's looking at this year is on the education side of how can we establish what a Zoe developer is and what a Zoe administrator is. And that's sort of that last piece of the puzzle. It helps establish the market for professionals around this. And then every single customer that's looking at adopting Zoe, they say, okay, I got apps I can buy, I got a vendor that can support it, and I have a hiring queue of, a hiring pool that I can work with. And those are the ingredients to building it. And those are the things that communities do the hard work of making the great technology. We try to sit in here and say, how can we build and get this ecosystem going, which is then that's really when everything starts to come together.
You're right. So, guys, we have about 5 minutes left, and we spoke about V2 and we spoke about timelines. We spoke about some of the key new functionality that V2 has in there, right? But I know how these things work. What beyond V2? What else? Joe, you are you're the voice of experience here. You've been down
this road.
I wouldn't fool age with experience, Alan, but I'll take that as a compliment.
No, I didn't say you were the oldest. And if I just said you were the voice of experience. I'm older, but what do you see beyond V2? Let's frame it that way. Zoe beyond V2.
Okay, so what I see, I'll frame this from a negative. So what I see, the Zoe of today is very different to the Zoe of 2 years ago. Right? In fact, even when the very first Zoe came out, the Zoe Explorer didn't even exist. Yeah. I think I'm old enough to remember that, right? It got, there were some very exciting things. So the change, I believe in change, period, across whatever it is. So I don't want to make any predictions, but if we create the right ingredients, in the kitchen, we throw a bit of chili flakes, we throw in some honey, who knows, maybe it tastes well together, maybe it doesn't, we throw it out, we do something else. So by getting fresh people, diverse people on the project, we're agile, we do what's called, we plan, we have scrums that, then the future is hard to predict, but the future will be relevant. It will be what customers want. We already know it's what they want. We can see that on our adoption curve. There are some exciting things I could tease out. We have an initiative where we're trying to integrate Zoe in some chat collaboration tools that people use. That's very exciting to me. But who knows? There's a wonderful line at the end of Back to the Future where Doc comes back in a train. I don't know if you guys have seen it. And he says, that they show the photo and he says to Marty McFly, he says, the future's whatever you want to make it. So if we keep rolling out that recipe that we know, we just bake, rinse, repeat, the future is good. That's all. So that's my closing statement on the future.
I love it. Hey, Michael, I'm going to ask you, what do you see when you look beyond V2 for Zoe?
Oh, I did like what Joe had to say, although I thought when you were doing that quote, I thought you were going to say, it might be a different one in the series, but I remember Doc saying where Marty asked, what about roads? And he says, where we're going, we don't need no roads.
Yeah. He flips his glasses down.
So hard to say, but I like the chat ops initiative that Joe teased out. Also, there's a little bit of development going on in extensions for additional IDEs like IntelliJ and the IntelliJ base suite of IDEs, so like IntelliJ, PyCharm, things like that. And IBA Group has been a big contributor to that initiative. So look for them to continue to grow in the Zoe space and move some of these projects forward. And beyond that, I'd look for us to, we have a growing amount of interest from the community and enhancement requests in our repository. So also look to, address what the community's been asking for as far as feature improvements. Once we finish up some of these larger, sort of enterprise scale initiatives, come back to what some of the individual developers are asking for and try to prioritize that.
Excellent. Hey, Billy, before I ask you about your aspirations for Zoe, do you even know these Back to the Future movies they're talking about? The folks your age still watch them?
I'm not that young, yes.
Okay.
I know all the Back to the Future movies. I just, but for myself with the future, I was going to speak on, the community part that Mike just spoke on, and definitely, that our community and our customers, bringing those enhancements, that'll really help drive the future. And then also, like Joe said, we'll come up with our own initiatives and different ideas of what we can bring in and how to do something differently and just try it out, see if it works. Definitely focus on user-friendly and easy to use, that way it's not too difficult for the users to pick up and move forward with. So I think the future's bright. It's definitely bright.
Absolutely. John, as usual, I'm going to give you the last word, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, this is a project I remember talking about with a few folks in early 2018 of just the idea of bringing together effectively three technologies that were solving in the same space, but solving different parts of the puzzle and integrating them together on, a lot of different levels, both from a technical level, but also sort of like a business and a governance level. And at the same time, really bringing this industry, which had already, mainframe and open source, I mean, they're not strangers to one another, but I think for the first time we saw it in such a large scale capacity that it was a lot. I mean, it was an amazing feat. I remember being on the stage at Share and, the group conveying the message that this isn't, an IBM, well, at the time it was CA Technologies, but now Broadcom and Rocket owned product that they're pitching. This is an open source project and it's for all of you, and all of you get to be a part of it. And, and that's everything from, just the direction, but just the governance and how it works. You add a line of code, it's just like the Linux kernel. You add a line of code to Zoe, and you're a part copyright owner of it. Like your stuff sticks with it. So it was such sort of a novel concept. And I would say, on one front, Zoe has been groundbreaking this industry based upon what it's been trying to do. And it's hitting all of that. And the fact that we're seeing the enterprise adoption and then that feeding back into the cycle of the project is amazing. But at the same time, it's kicked off sort of this inside the mainframe community of wow, open source, this is a way to do things. And we've seen such growth from there. And on the outside, it's a renaissance about mainframe. I mean, go back before 2018 and how many times did you see mainframe written about in any light, positive, negative, whatnot? Like how many times were you seeing developers like this coming forward? And I think it's just been so transformative on just so many different levels that it's one of those technologies that, just like the first sort of modern, System 360 rolling off the line in, 64, 68, something like that. Somebody could probably correct me on that in the chat. Zoe, is that same sort of landmark for this ecosystem. And it's really, really exciting to see. And, I'm just in awe of, these folks here for their great technical skills, the communities around it, and that whole group of new folks that are coming to the mainframe. It's just really inspiring to see.
Absolutely. Hey guys, before we sign off, why don't we give people the website where they can go get more information on Zoe?
Hey, Alan, it's zoe.org.
That's Z-O-W-E
or Z, if you're in my part of the world, Z-O-W-E, .org. Yeah.
Fantastic. Good. That's a great way to end this. Hey, Joe, Michael, Billy, thank you so much for being our panel on this episode of the Open Mainframe. We're going to invite you all to come back again. Hopefully it won't be a year until we look at Zoe. Maybe V2. What are we talking? April to June timeframe, right? Maybe we'll come back around then and look at it. John, as usual, thanks for co-hosting with me and for all your support.
Thank you, Alan. This has been great. Looking forward to more of these.
Absolutely. Many thanks to the Linux Foundation and the whole Open Mainframe project for partnering and sponsoring with us. And most of all, thanks to you for watching this. We hope you find it interesting. We'll be back next month with another great Open Mainframe video. Until then, go check out Zoe. Good luck to you all, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, we're back. Next up, we have our Something Old segment. This one is from the recent Predict 2022 conference. It features Emmett Keefe and Thomas Crane from Insight Partners. They have their keynote presentation, which is titled 2022, The New Wave of Technologies. So taking a look at what they're seeing in the space, in the investment space, what can we see in relation to new technologies specifically related to DevOps, CI/CD, cloud, and cyber. They've got a lot of insight into what's happening in the market, and they share it with us. So let's go ahead and roll it now.
Hey everyone, I'm Alan Schimmel, CEO Techstrong Group. Welcome to Predict 2022. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I'm really happy to have two of my friends from Insight Partners on today's Predict event. They've been on previous ones with me. I want to introduce you to our first Insight Partner who's going to speak today, and that's my friend Emmett Keefe. Emmett is now based in the UK. Actually, he's back in London, I believe. And, you know, Emmett, in addition to being an Insight Partner, is also the founder of the Insight Ignite, which, if you're not familiar, is a series of networking events and seminars, I don't know what symposiums between large enterprise C-level folks and some of the Insight portfolio companies and some great speakers. It happens all over the world. Well, when it's not COVID, it's virtual now. But it affords Emmett a rare opportunity to have a bird's eye view of the world of enterprise technology that few people have. And so it's always great to hear from Emmett what he sees as the big trends, what's coming, where we've been, where we're going. We are thrilled to have Emmett Keefe with us. Let me now introduce you to Emmett Keefe, Insight Ignite, Insight Partners.
Hello, my name's Emmett Keefe. I'm the founder of Insight Ignite and an operating partner at Insight Partners, which is a private equity firm. I also have with me Thomas Crane, who's a managing director at the firm as well, and focused on our infrastructure investment strategy. And we'll hear from him a little bit later in the session. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about who is Insight Partners and how do we invest. A few minutes about Ignite, which is our digital acceleration program, and how you might be able to take advantage of it. And then a little bit about, in the last few years, what have we been investing in? It's been an absolutely fascinating period during the pandemic. There's obviously been a lot of tragedy and suffering and challenges in the world, but at the same time, we've had a massive acceleration of digital transformation, which has also caused our investment velocity to increase significantly. And I'll talk a little bit about what we've been focused on over the last few years. But first, on Insight Partners, we're a 25-year-old private equity firm, and our investment thesis has been the same since the beginning. We invest at the center of market timing. There's always a moment in the history of a problem where the world decides, I want to solve that now, and I'll do whatever it takes. I'll change process, I'll retrain people, I'll retire legacy systems. That moment always arrives. It's never quite clear when it will arrive, but it ultimately typically arrives. So as a firm, we're tracking upwards of 160,000 software companies that have gotten Series A, Series B, C, et cetera, funding, and we wait patiently until they hit this inflection point. So that's fundamentally what the firm is all about. Over the last 25 years, this will give you a sense for how selective we are about that inflection point. We currently have about 600 investments, and when we make an investment, we tend to stay active with that company for quite some period of time. We currently have 30 billion under management. Over the past few decades, we've had more than 50 IPOs, 200 acquisitions that were led by our portfolio, and 125 strategic exits. So very successful track record using that model. So this is really what's fascinating about the firm. So I mentioned we're tracking these 160,000 companies. Each year we talk with about 30,000 of them to get a read on how fast are they actually accelerating. Typically one of the leading indicators of the inflection point is that revenue is growing 100% year over year, or 200, 300, 400% year over year. So we want to get a read on how fast are they growing. And we invite some of them to come present to us. So each year we host about 2,000 presentations to really take a deeper dive on the business. And last year we invested in more than 200 businesses and deployed more than 10 billion in capital. What's interesting is pre-pandemic, that number was very different. Our velocity has tripled or quadrupled with the pandemic because there's been so much acceleration of digital change. So to give you a feel for what the world's been up to, and by looking at what we're investing in, it'll tell you what are the general problem areas that large global companies have been focused on. There's been a complete rethink of cyber, and you'll hear later from Thomas Crane what we're seeing in that world. But clearly with the virtual workplace and everything going on with the changing environment, there's been a whole bunch of new categories that have unlocked. Both brand new categories, but also new disruptors that are coming in and disrupting the legacy players. One of the categories I find very interesting is data and analytics. There was a lot of hype around data in years leading up to 2020, but really we've seen a complete acceleration of data and analytics. Large global companies are ready now to democratize data. They've put data at the center of their innovation strategy. They're making the data available to their cloud native developers. Data and analytics has truly come out of the hype cycle, and we've seen a large number of categories unlocking as a result of that. Even though DevOps and CI/CD has been around for a long time, we've seen a renewed acceleration of next generation CI/CD tools. And you'll hear from Thomas later, what are we seeing exactly there? But there's been a new set of investments happening. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, the cloud also came out of the hype cycle, even though, the cloud's been around since 1998, really. And, there's been lots and lots of talk about it, et cetera. Last summer in 2021 is really when we saw large corporations making truly bold moves when it comes to the public cloud. And that's caused a whole bunch of categories in the sort of infrastructure automation, cloud security, data protection, whole bunch of categories have been accelerating as the world is getting more serious about the cloud. And then because of the pivoting towards digital, we've seen digital customer experience emerge as a major category, lots of different technologies in there. One interesting one as an example is Quantum Metric, which helps you use data and use the cloud to basically shine a spotlight on friction points in your customer journey, and then point your development organization at smoothing out those friction points and measuring the impact on the improved customer experience, and many other examples in that category. With the move towards the virtual workplace and everything happening with the future of work, there's been lots happening around digital employee experience and HR automation. So big categories there. And then automation, there's been kind of a second wave. RPA was 2 or 3 years back, but now we're seeing more vertical automation platforms, and also platforms that are more deeply integrated into the application stack and the infrastructure. And then also lots happening around compliance tech as well. And then finally, the verticals that have really been accelerating, fintech, lots going on in that world. Health tech really emerged over the last few years. We had a few investments, leading up to this period, but in the last few years, this has really emerged as a major category. And then also interestingly, property tech as well. So we're still watching very carefully retail, CPG, et cetera, and other industry verticals. So these are the categories where we've deployed very large amounts of capital and have incredible knowledge. And based on the amount of thought leadership we have within the firm, we launched this program, Insight Ignite, back in 2014 to make that all of that knowledge that we have available. And if we can understand all the problems that an organization is looking to solve, we can curate solutions of those problems either from our portfolio or just more broadly from that sourcing platform. We're also building a community of leaders. We now have 4,000 C-level leaders that we're collaborating with, who've either attended roundtables or met portfolio companies or sit on boards or have collaborated with us in some other way We help them with technology matchmaking, with personal and professional development. We help connect them to other peers to look for insights as they value peer insights so dearly. So this is really an exciting community that we're building within the firm. And then I'll say just a closing comment here before passing over to Alan and Thomas. There's also been a lot of talk in the last 5 years about digital transformation and large companies really needing to cross this digital chasm or this digital Rubicon. And there's been talk about, large companies are going to be either extinct or transform. And from my point of view, a lot of that has also been hype. Pre-pandemic, I called it digital theater. What's happened with the pandemic is there's been a complete, unlocking and basically glass breaking around digital change. And I think the next big topic that these large global companies are going to be focused on as they move, to transform is how do I truly transform business agility and how do I truly transform my delivery agility. And I think this is obviously music to the ears of everyone on, who's listening to this broadcast, because I know agility is core to what you do. But I just think, the time for agility is going to actually come forward, and it's going to be now. So it's going to be a very exciting several years as we move into the future. So with that, Alan, I'll pass over to you, and I want to close with an invitation. If for those of you that run DevOps and are more senior within the organization, we'd very much like to bring you into our community. You're also welcome to make this available to your leadership so they can sort of tap into this community. But we'd invite everyone to consider becoming part of our community. And with that, Alan, I'll pass over to you so you can take a deeper dive with Thomas on these topics.
Hey everyone, Alan Schimmel here. So we hope you enjoyed hearing from Emmett Keefe from Insight Partners and, of course, founder of Insight Ignite. Very few people in the world have a bird's eye view of the marketplace and trends that Emmett brings to his position and what he shared with you. So fantastic to have Emmett on here doing that. But we have a 1-2 punch from Insight Partners lined up for Predict this year. And I'm really happy to introduce our next Insight Partners presenter. He's a friend of mine from in New York, in Williamsburg. His name's Thomas Crane. Thomas is a partner. Is it managing director at Insight Partners now?
That's right.
Congratulations, Thomas, and welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, very excited to be here as always, Alan. So thank you. So yeah, officially looking at Insight's newest managing director here. As you know, Alan, because we've been talking for a while, I've been with the firm for almost 10 years, and so excited to hit this milestone in my career, and of course, more excited about the really compelling companies that we've been partnering with over the last few years. So,
yep, couldn't happen to a nicer guy, Thomas. Congratulations, and good for you, man. I'm happy.
Thank you.
So, Thomas, 2021 was certainly another unusual year for a lot of reasons. We don't have to really jump into it. But, there were some big stories in 2021. And, DevOps continues and digital transformation, is a catalyst for change. Cybersecurity has just been, 2021 was a banner year, unfortunately, for cybersecurity, right? But, it creates opportunities. But that's my take. I'd love to hear, what do you think are the big trends from 2021? How do they transfer? What will we see play out in 2022?
Great. And so I'm just to frame this discussion, I'd like to look back in the last couple of years, even since COVID happened. And what's really transpired is, first of all, you have the value of cryptocurrency has exploded, and that's created essentially like free financing for a lot of these cyber adversaries. And now in 2021, you really saw the effects of that kind of industrial machine and all that financing come to fruition with these really sophisticated kind of ransomware as a service types of offerings, where essentially the adversaries have productized on their side, and they've created these kinds of commercial enterprises not dissimilar to private software companies. To the extent where they even offer free customer support and, ransom negotiation services and, hotlines you can call And as a result, I mean, of course, we've seen just a number of ransomware incidents have exploded. And, correspondingly, the cost of insuring against cyber risk has also exploded. And so we're seeing just a massive increase in the pricing of these policies, for example. But, of course, that also means there's a tit for tat sort of evolution happening on the private enterprise side. And so if you look at the commercial solutions that are being adopted, you can really see a change that's happening. I mean, in particular, of course, you've got traditional anti-malware and that market that's being disrupted by kind of the next-gen AI-enabled anti-malware offerings and endpoint detection response offerings. But, I think also you're seeing like a permanent shift that's happening to this notion of the secure access service edge. And so, I think what happened during COVID is the shift to remote work pulled forward a lot of the sort of trend toward remote work and the idea of no longer do you have a centralized kind of hub and spoke network architecture. What's interesting is, there's been a lot of winners from COVID that have sort of crested and now seeing actually growth rates really decelerate. Zoom could be an example of that. Some of these kind of remote oriented companies. But if you look at companies like Zscaler, for example, they really have actually continued to take off. And, they're even approaching $1 billion of revenue growing, accelerated growth. And so you actually see these trends not sort of going away. You actually see, in some of these cases, especially this shift to, the risk is isolated at the endpoint and now at the network level, and that virtual network, that's really starting to be kind of the new normal.
Sure. Thomas, Jay Chowdhury's a friend of mine from Zscaler. And look, I've been on panels with Jay 10 years ago where he was talking about this very same thing. It wasn't COVID or the drive to remote work. It was the death of the spoken wheel network, the idea of backhoeing traffic from wherever you are to a central, over the WAN to the LAN via VPN or whatever, and then going back out to the cloud. It really made no sense. Direct to cloud, Jay was preaching direct to cloud 10 years ago. Maybe it took COVID to really just drive it home. But long live direct to cloud. I'm no fan of the hub and spoke. I haven't been for a long time. So,
I mean, you needed some fundamental innovation at the sort of software-defined WAN and software-defined networking layer to enable this. And I mean, Zscaler, they've, to their credit, done a phenomenal job kind of creating that technical foundation. But you now see kind of other competitors emerging. I happen to be directly involved with one called Perimeter 81 that, they're trying to appeal to cloud native companies that aren't actually moving away from a hub and spoke architecture, but actually have sort of a clean slate, more of a greenfield type of opportunity to work from. And, you're seeing sort of adoption from different types of companies toward this new kind of paradigm of, sort of a totally decentralized, remote enabled kind of workforce. And so those companies also are just seeing a tremendous amount of growth.
I mean, we're calling it here. We've written and reported on this kind of work from anywhere. You've got to be able to just connect from anywhere, work from anywhere, and if you're an app provider or an organization, you got to support from anywhere, right? And that's kind of where it is. On the cyber theme, Thomas, as big as ransomware as a service was, and the sophistication of it is boggling. Software supply chain, security issues, I think were the other big story. Art, go ahead, man.
I mean, so of course, Log4j at the end of 2021 probably caught a lot of people by surprise. And I think what was really the wake-up call there is the level of ubiquity that some of these kinds of vulnerabilities in the software supply chain, how quickly folks realize that they have an exposure to a new zero day because, today modern applications are just essentially a bunch of different open source components and third-party components put together. And there's not a tremendous amount of visibility into what kind of downstream risk that creates. And then, all of a sudden a standard logging routine becomes, the source of a huge vulnerability. And so we're going to see more of that, of the Log4j types of zero-day vulns coming out. And, I think this is the compounding complexity of software development and just these systems and applications and how interdependent they are is just going to create more and more of these kinds of urgent kinds of CVEs. And so, of course, we see already this kind of shift from, once a month or once a quarter scanning and, code scanning as sort of an afterthought or sort of a gate that developers, have to fight against, to something that, is secure by design. And this idea of really integrating security into the developer mindset, into the engineer mindset, into the workflow in a way that isn't a barrier to productivity, but actually sort of the tool set enables this kind of notion of DevSecOps to sort of operate in an orchestrated and cohesive way. And I mean, you see companies like Sneak that have really revolutionized that sort of notion, and the idea of, you can actually be the friend to the developer too, and still, be security conscious. And I think there's going to be a ton of more companies that have carry that kind of appeal.
Well, that's the key to DevSecOps is you've got to be a friend to developers who are security conscious, right? And they are. But what's interesting about this, though, Thomas, the Log4j especially, it's not that there was a bug. It was a defect in the design, right? It was a design defect in the component itself. But life imitates art. The same way we found out during COVID that relying on one country to produce all of our masks and personal protection equipment, PPE, was a bad idea when that company stops exporting it. When we all rely on one open source component as such a linchpin of what we do, if there's a design defect or a bug in that one open source component, it's so widespread that it's like Log4j level, right? And so maybe that bodes well why we need more diversity in a lot of these open source components. You're a capitalist. The law of capitalism says the best solution will win out and dominate, and it should, and I guess that's the way of the world. But then when that best solution has a problem, we all suffer for it.
Look, I mean, I don't think you're going to be able to get away from that sort of single point of failure aspect of, it's just the nature of open source. Everyone sort of rallies behind a certain sort of component that works really well. And then, all of a sudden that becomes very ubiquitous very quickly. And then that creates sort of downstream risk and single point of failure risk, which, I mean, we're talking about cloud-based dynamic applications, which can be updated relatively easily. Think about what the implication is for these kinds of vulnerabilities and this kind of risk in more operational technology environments and more industrial control and critical infrastructure. And that, I think, is maybe my third major trend here for 2022 is, especially with the rise of geopolitical tension and, of course, the advanced capabilities of these nation-state actors, you see, a really heightened risk around critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, and, industrial IoT. I mean, this is something that, of course, these systems aren't as pervasive in terms of, relative to cloud applications, but the risk impact of some of them being affected is huge, right? I mean, when you're talking about power grids going offline. And I think today is, it's truly a reality. I mean, it's no longer just a theoretical risk. We've seen these kinds of systems being taken offline or the potential of them being taken offline. And so that's another major one that I'm watching closely for 2022.
Sure. I mean, 2021, we saw Colonial Pipeline. So not necessarily critical infrastructure until I had to wait online to get gas down here. That becomes critical to me. But, but that's a small pack. Can you imagine if it was an electric grid? Also down here in Florida, because it's Florida, we had an attack on a water plant, right? Or a potential attack on a water plant, or an attempted attack, I guess is a better way of saying it. I agree with you. I mean, that's this scary stuff. For years I was involved in security with NERC and FERC. I don't know if you're familiar with NERC. They protect. Yep. And we've known the potential of an attack on our electric grid, let's say, for years and years. But it was always theoretical, I think, as you mentioned. I think we're entering the realm now of, not if, but when. And
look, I mean, I'm just seeing it on the commercial vendors, too. A lot of them have been kind of incubating for a few years, and now we're really seeing them start to take off in a big way because sort of the private sector has woken up to the reality of this potential. And so, companies like Armis, for example, have definitely grown super quickly around this macro. There's other companies too that are looking at, how do we apply the same kinds of security standards that we use in human to computer applications now in machine to machine applications. And so how do you create secure machine identity just like you do, secure human identity? And so companies like Keyfactor, for example, making sure that you've got sort of private security and private certificate management around everything from, medical devices to connected cars toward, even just more cloud server types of connections. And so you're seeing now this notion of just any kind of application, human security application designed around humans now proliferating toward machine to machine.
Got it. You know what I find interesting, Thomas, is, and I want to emphasize this to our audience, when I talk to a lot of my friends in security, I don't want it to come across as FUD and doom and gloom. The fact of the matter is companies like an Armis or a Keyfactor or many of the companies that we're seeing emerge, our level of providing cybersecurity protection is probably much higher now than it was like when I was in it, right? When I was out here, doing cyber. The problem is the level and sophistication, as you mentioned, of the attackers, of the bad guys, is equally as formidable as our defenses are. So what are we to do? Let's talk about Insight's role in this, right? I mean, you're funding a lot of companies, but you have profit as a motive, obviously. But how do you see your role in that?
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly. We've been super focused on the cyber sector since the beginning of our founding and working closely, too, with companies both in the U.S. and overseas, and particularly out of Israel, which has been such a hub of innovation within cyber. And, to some extent, if we can do well by doing good in the world in terms of, protecting the free world against both for-profit adversaries and nation-state adversaries, that feels like I've kind of done something good beyond just a for-profit motive, and so it's certainly a motivator to get up in the morning. At the same time, I also see just a huge amount of young, energetic, super smart entrepreneurs coming out of the public sector and applying what they've learned in some of these situations where you're actually dealing in sort of high security types of environments, and now applying those learnings in the private sector. And I think that, to me, is also just a really exciting. I mean, we're seeing just a huge revolutionization of the kind of military industrial complex within the U.S. to just be able to have innovation at the heart of what we do and just drive that to really put us in a favorable position relative to the rest of the world. And I think that that is also just an exciting element of working in this kind of world.
Absolutely, man. Thomas, let's recap if we can. So 3 big trends carrying over from 2021 into 2022 is sort of the, epitomized by ransomware as a service, but let's call it the sophistication of the bad guys' industrial complex. Right? They're mirroring the private sector in many ways. In features and functionality, right? That would be number one. Number 2, supply chain.
Network decentralization.
Oh, excuse me, right. Network decentralization, right? The death of the hub and spoke sort of system, a moat and castle, which is where I came from, right? And moving to direct to cloud, right? And all that entails. Then number 3, software supply chain, open source components, and the double-edged sword of that, if you will, of widespread,
as manifested by Log4j, for example.
Right, as the latest example.
Coming.
Yeah, as the latest example, right? I remember Heartbleed on the Intel processors, and of course the Struts 2 vulnerability about 3-4 years ago, right? That brought down. Yep. So that, and then and just the whole. I mean, it really is an ultimate battle of good versus evil. It sounds like a Marvel or a DC movie, right? The good guys versus the bad guys, and hope someone doesn't snap their fingers. It's going to be quite a year. Quite a year.
Absolutely. So we're watching it closely. Certainly now over 30 investments just in the cyber sector, and not slowing down anytime soon. We just brought on Steve Ward as our newest managing director focused on cyber. He was recently CISO at Home Depot and worked as a security leader in a number of other roles. So bringing in also the operating sort of expertise of being on the front lines of responding to these incidents to just our investment team perspective, and hopefully making us sharper as we go forward into the new year.
Love it, man. Thomas Crane, thank you for being with us. This has got to be your second or third Predict. I feel like you've been on with us for as long as we've been doing it, man. I appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you, Alan. Always a pleasure to be here, and hopefully I'll be batting 1,000 on my predictions for 22.
Well, I didn't bring up last year's predictions, so it's okay. We're not going to hold your feet to the fire, but we may. Thomas Crane, Insight Partners here on Predict 2022. Thank you, Thomas, and thank our friend Emmett Keefe from Insight Partners, Insight Ignite. And we have a great day full of predictions for you here on Predict 2022. Stick around.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at how organizations can migrate existing infrastructure to Terraform. Infrastructure as code enables managing and provisioning infrastructure through code instead of manual processes, and it is crucial for DevOps teams as it lets them manage infrastructure components such as networks and load balancers, and enables test applications in production-like environments early in the development cycle. It allows DevOps teams to build, change, and manage infrastructure in a safe, consistent, and repeatable way. While infrastructure as code might be frustrating, as it traditionally requires cloud infrastructure to be created manually, Terraform brings the existing infrastructure under code management safely while removing manual processes. Terraform is one of the most popular open source infrastructure as code tools because it lets a user define resources and infrastructure in a human readable declarative configuration files and easily manage an infrastructure's life cycle. This article discusses the benefits that Terraform can bring to an infrastructure as code environment and walks through the steps to migrate an existing infrastructure to Terraform. And we look at whether custom-built software is better than off-the-shelf. It's a tricky question with many nuances to consider, but this article is squarely in the camp of custom-built. It points out that in our new hyper-digital reality, every company, no matter what industry, needs to deliver exceptional technical experiences through online and mobile platforms. And if CIOs don't have a digital strategy that prioritizes developing customized software the right way, their business will lose customers and fall behind. Off-the-shelf software simply isn't the answer, according to this article, and is unable to meet this demand as it offers the same solutions to all customers in a world where every company has a tech-savvy consumer base that expects unique experiences. Major software vendors that churn out products at a massive scale cannot offer products and services that allow for that level of customization. It's not profitable or feasible for them to do so. In contrast, when businesses build custom software the right way and for the long term, their IT teams can continuously make changes based on evolving customer needs and market opportunities. This article looks at two examples of companies that went the custom-built route using in-house resources and a modern application platform, and why only businesses that take ownership of their software innovation will survive and thrive. In news, Cloudify is offering a free user interface module that extends its infrastructure provisioning platform and enables DevOps professionals to integrate unlimited Terraform modules. Speaking of Terraform, Terraform UI provides a familiar construct for DevOps teams using the open source DevOps automation platform to provision infrastructure as code by seamlessly importing Terraform modules to Cloudify without writing blueprints or any additional glue code. Cloudify now automatically generates the wrapper required for each Terraform template to enable DevOps teams to collaboratively manage secrets, execute concurrent deployments, store states remotely, and monitor deployments, users, and versions via any Git repository. Those Terraform modules can then be integrated with APIs and CI/CD platforms as DevOps teams require. All right, over on Container Journal, we have the latest from Sysdig, which is allying with Snyk to integrate their respective security technologies to enable organizations to better secure the entire container lifecycle. The integration of Sysdig Secure with Snyk Container will make it easier to remediate vulnerabilities in containers that are discovered by the Sysdig platform. Sysdig Secure is a container intelligence platform that unifies both monitoring and enforcement of security policies using open source Falco software for securing container runtimes. Falco was developed by Sysdig and currently is a sandbox project within the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Sysdig Secure also includes a Kubernetes policy advisor to help organizations define cybersecurity policies. Falco Tuning, which optimizes an open-source container security runtime, and Activity Audit, an incident response and auditing tool. The intelligence collected by Sysdig Secure can now be passed on to Snyk Container, a SaaS application that scans for vulnerabilities in containers, and together they provide the context Snyk users need to pinpoint exploitable packages active in production applications. Easy for me to say. All right, and the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, in collaboration with Datadog, New Relic, and Slashdata, has published a report based on a global survey of more than 3,800 IT professionals. It finds a wider range of emerging technologies are now being deployed on top of Kubernetes. 96% of respondents are now either using or evaluating Kubernetes. Of those, 79% use some form of certified Kubernetes instance that is provided as a managed service, with Amazon Elastic Container Kubernetes Container Service for Kubernetes, Azure Kubernetes Service, and Azure Engine, respectively, the most consumed. At the same time, use of the Containerd runtime as an alternative to Docker grew 500% year over year. Although the base of adoption for other cloud-native technologies is much smaller than Kubernetes, the adoption of Envoy proxy software increased 39% year over year, while FluentD data collector and Prometheus monitoring software usage grew 53% and 43% respectively. On Security Boulevard, we look at the dangers of poor offboarding practices. During the Great Resignation, with employees quitting with employees quitting in droves, not properly offboarding former employees is particularly dangerous, leaving companies vulnerable to any number of security issues. And research from Beyond Identity found that former employees are taking advantage of their continued access to corporate resources. In fact, a whopping 83% of former employees surveyed said they continued to access the accounts of their previous place of employment even after leaving the company. Nearly 1/4 hung on to a password well after they departed. And organizations are feeling the consequences of poor offboarding habits. 3/4 of those surveyed said they were negatively impacted by an employee breaching their digital security. And alarmingly, 56% of employees used their continued digital access to harm their former employer, according to the study. While 70% of employees surveyed said they underwent formal exit processes, the survey results made it clear the current processes need to change. Offboarding was most likely to be handled by a supervisor or HR, though in some cases it actually fell to a coworker. For half of respondents, the process included returning company devices, and only about 1/3 were taken through the process for forwarding email, completing an exit interview, and/or deleting or resetting certain accounts. This article looks at some of the security issues surrounding improper offboarding and offers some steps organizations can take to counter insider threats. And finally, we look at how to create a digital workplace governance program. IT and security stakeholders understand that information governance, including lifecycle management and records management, is a key step for both mitigating risk and improving end-user experiences. People shouldn't have to sort through decades of context and content when searching for information. But deciding what to retain is overwhelming because of the sheer amount of data involved. So how should organizations proceed? This article suggests that democratizing lifecycle management is the way to go. In other words, move the lifecycle management decisions closer to the business and away from InfoSec and IT. Empower business users and business leaders, the people who are closest to the content and collaboration and have lifecycle management training, tools, and support, and engage them often. The end goal is that any of the remaining files has a clear history of accountability as far as who retained that content and, more importantly, the business rationale explaining why it was retained. The article also offers up 3 ways to democratize lifecycle management. As we move ever further into the era of the digital workplace, it's the modern CISO's responsibility to abandon legacy collaboration governance ideas and embrace the democratization of collaboration. All right, that's it for the headlines. I'll be back tomorrow with a fresh new batch. Until then, hope everybody has a great day. Please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with Ohad Bobrov, who is the CTO and co-founder at Talon Cybersecurity. Ohad, so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here on Techstrong TV with me.
Okay, thank you for having me.
You bet, you bet. So I'm interested in having a conversation with you about web extensions and cybersecurity issues thereof. But first, I wonder if you could introduce us to Talon Cybersecurity.
Perfect. So in Talon, we are creating an enterprise browser. So basically, we took Chromium, which is the open source that Chrome and Edge and a few other browsers run upon, and we created an enterprise version of the browser embedded with many enterprise security features like network inspection, isolation, etc. And we are providing it to enterprises around the globe. We are a new startup. We started around a year and a half ago. And perfect. Yeah.
That's great. I love the fact that that you guys are really putting an emphasis on cybersecurity as it pertains to web browsers, and web extensions have been they've been growing in popularity. I've noticed. I mean, everything these days seems to be a web extension to kind of make our lives easier. But to your point, you guys are saying that they actually do kind of introduce a level of vulnerabilities that vulnerabilities are never a good thing, but I think with the number of web extensions that are out there these days, we're even more vulnerable than before. So why don't you kind of walk me through what you guys are seeing in the space right now, and kind of set the stage, if you will, to the level of vulnerabilities that web extensions do introduce.
Great. So like you said, so web extension by nature are very good. So we use them, so they improve our usability. We use them in many different applications. And in general, they improve our ability to do our job or to browse the web better. But with many other technologies, it also poses different threats. So as they become more and more popular, and in general, browser become a very major application, specifically in the enterprise space, so they do pose different threats. So, for example, because they are asking for excessive permission, it can leave the user exposed to different type of threats, and we see them in more and more places. So, for example, in iOS, a few years ago, you couldn't install web browser extension, but now it enabled. You can also do it on Android. So we see them everywhere now. So it is a growing threat. Specifically, there are few types of threats. One of them is because extension ask for excessive permission. It either be because the developer saw that in the future he will try to ask for, he will try to have an additional features. And if someone was able to exploit this extension, the backend or the actual extension on the device, it's able to collect very sensitive information, because extension currently able to collect everything that you are doing on the browser. They can collect the password, they can collect a different credential from the actual site, a crypto wallet, a user data. Everything that you are using in the browser is accessible to the extensions.
Well, that's pretty terrifying. Thanks very much. So what do we do then? I mean, because they have become so popular, and frankly, there are certain things that I like to do. I have a couple extensions on my web browser that I know and I trust, but without them, I don't think I'd be able to do my job as well, or at least as as quickly and as efficiently as I do. Or at least I think I do. But how can we protect ourselves? I mean, are there certain things that people need to look out for when we're looking at whether to add a web extension onto their browser? Are there certain maybe red flags, if you will, that folks should be aware of?
Yes, so I think that as a personal user, when you download a new extension, you should have a look on the web page, on the Chrome Web Store, for example. You should look how many downloads you have there, the general rating. If there is a specific a comment that might indicate that something is not right, and later on, if after you install the extension, you see that something is behaving a bit differently, you should be aware of. In general, like for any application that you download for your PC or to your mobile device, you should download it only from official places. You should only download the application that you trust the developer and you know what they're doing. Specifically, it's more important for an extension like Password Manager, that do have access to all the passwords that you use on your browser, grammar corrections, so it can, because they basically read all the text that you're using on the browser, and you should also review the permission, because permission basically tells you what access the extension has.
So are there ways that we can kind of limit what web extensions are able to do on the web and what they're able to actually see? Because you did mention they are overly permissive. A lot of them are. So is there a way to kind of dial back that level of permissions?
So unfortunately, not really. Usually you are basically, you can either approve it or don't approve the extension. You can, of course, disable it at any moment. As we published a few weeks ago, there are extensions that were flagged as malicious, but still you can find it on the Chrome Web Store and you can still download them. So you should be aware of what the extension are doing and try to limit your exposure.
Well, I feel like, a lot of these web extensions are, a lot of them are very useful, obviously, to help us do what we do on a daily basis. But a lot of them are, shall we say, extraneous. They're not really that useful for folks on a day-to-day basis. So would you suggest that organizations or individuals only use the web extensions that they know they're going to get daily use out of and obviously from companies they trust? Or has it gotten to the point where even those web extensions that are offered by what we call kind of mainstream companies, even those are kind of suspect these days? I mean, are we looking at web extensions as just kind of like an evil thing altogether?
No, I wouldn't go that far. Okay, so I think that I think that most of the developer and most of the extension are there, to make our life better. Mm-hmm. But I do think that specifically for enterprises, it does make sense to understand which extension you have installed in your environment, mm-hmm. and you can use external feeds and external tool like ours to manage the extension that the organization use in their devices. There are organizations that do limit and only allow you to install an extension from a pre-approved list of extensions that someone vetted and someone made sure that it's okay. And like I would say it's like everything in security. There is a line between usability and security. And each person, each organization needs to choose where exactly you want to be on this vertical.
So, do you think that web extensions should be allowed in an enterprise? Because for a consumer, it's one thing. If you download an extension that is malicious or contains malicious code, you're infecting your machine. But if you're hooked up to the company network, you potentially could infect the entire network and the infrastructure. So, what would you suggest enterprises do regarding web extensions? Do you think they should be allowed, or do you think that there's there should be allowed but with tight controls, or what's your advice?
So I think that it should be allowed. I think that I don't think that you can imagine the current work environment without any extension. Mm-hmm. I think that the organization should have control. I think that one of the threats that you can be exposed with extension is that because extension only exists in the browser, many of the traditional endpoint security tools like antivirus, etc., are not even able to identify which extension are installed in the browser. And in many cases, attackers choose to use a malicious extension because all the interesting information is in the browser, so credential, data, and everything. But because they're not on the actual device, so in many cases, it's much harder to identify it. And to your question, so I do think that organizations should allow extension, but with a certain amount of control. They should have some way to inventory which extensions are installed and to set a policy. And so, for example, for password manager, I would advise to an organization to choose one password manager that they are trust and try to push it through the entire organization.
All right. Well, I think especially these days with so many folks who are working in either a fully remote or a hybrid remote environment, it's going to be more critical than ever that organizations understand exactly what their employees are doing with their computers and what they're downloading. So I think having that level of control is a very good thing for organizations to consider. Are there any other kind of tips or tricks, if you will, or best practices that organizations should consider when it comes to web extensions?
So I think that first of all, it's important to say that Google and the rest of the browser vendor are aware of the problem, and they did try compliance in order to make sure to reduce the attack surface. So, for example, now it's harder to install an extension not from the official web store. Okay, and they do try to introduce a very few limitation to what extension can do, and I think it's a step in the right direction. It's still not enough, and we still and you can still create it pretty easily malicious extension, but it's a very good. It's a step in the right direction. Another thing that you should be aware of is that in many cases, what attackers are doing, they are actually buying a popular extension, and there are a couple of examples of that. And after they bought the extension, the owner of the extension, they are introducing a malicious version of the extension, and therefore attacking all the users that install the extension and use it for legit usage. So we should be up to date and making sure that our browser are not compromised.
Interesting. So you're buying something that was legit, and then all of a sudden it becomes not so legit. That's not playing fair. I will say.
Attackers are looking for the path of least resistance, and if they have a way, to infect multiple devices very, very quickly, it's very easy. One of the advantages from the attacker point of view is that extensions are being updated behind the scene. So you wouldn't even know that you now downloaded a new version, which might contain a malicious piece of code.
Well, I have to tell you, I don't, obviously, I think I'm going to think twice now before I start downloading additional web extensions. And as I said before, just stick with the ones that I know are on the level and are safe for me to use. But I think we're going to see this problem actually get worse before it gets better. And I think raising awareness of the vulnerabilities that can be introduced through web extensions and the level of malicious activity that is happening with web extensions, I think is going to help hopefully help us secure our web browsers a lot better, and maybe think twice before we download those web extensions. So thank you so much for having the conversation with me, Ohad. It was great, and I do appreciate you taking the time and being on Techstrong TV with me today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you we've got so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. We got 3 here that are going to knock your socks off. So I wanted to let you know about them now so that you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is called Day Zero Service Mesh. This one is happening Tuesday, February 22nd at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is sponsored by Kong. The service mesh is the future of application connectivity. It delivers immediate value to any architecture by increasing application traffic's security, reliability, and observability. At the same time, it can be challenging to understand and deploy service mesh in production. Kuma, an open source CNCF sandbox project, takes a new approach to service mesh to build modern architectures across a variety of platforms, including Kubernetes and virtual machines. This webinar will walk through how to easily set up a service mesh across multiple environments and automatically enable security and observability on any network. The second one is called API Attack Protection. Don't overlook your number one attack vector. This one is happening Wednesday, February 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by ThreatX. Every digital business relies on APIs to generate revenue, and every DevOps team innovates on the backs of APIs. Even with this explosive growth, though, APIs are consistently overlooked in web application security programs. This webinar will cover the varied types of attack methods used against the APIs and introduce an attack-centric approach to API and web application security that provides full visibility into API and web application traffic to identify and block bad behaviors to protect exposed vulnerabilities before damage can be done. All right, the last webinar I want to let you know about today is called Mitigating Risks in Software Supply Chain Security. This one is happening Thursday, February 24th at noon Eastern on Security Boulevard. It is sponsored by Sneak. Software supply chains are becoming increasingly complex due to the changes in how modern software is built. These trends, together with new federal regulations, require organizations to take action to ensure the security and integrity of their software. But this is easier said than done. So in this session, we'll explore the software supply chain as an attack vector by identifying risks and mitigation strategies throughout the software development process and environment. Attendees will learn how they can meet new requirements and protect their software from these attacks. Good stuff. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we are back. Rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have The View with Vizard. In this conversation, Mike Vizard speaks with Dr. Dennis Hackney, who is the head of industrial cybersecurity solutions at ABS Group. They discuss how Log4j shell vulnerabilities are impacting industrial control systems. Really fascinating conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Dr. Dennis Hackney, who is head of industrial cybersecurity solutions development for ABS Group. They are a consulting firm, and we're talking about Log4j and vulnerabilities. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Michael.
Most people think about this issue as something that impacts Java applications running in the enterprise, but you guys seem to be encountering this out in industrial control systems. So what's the challenge, and why are we seeing these vulnerabilities out there? Because a lot of times you don't always associate Java with those types of platforms anyway.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions and statements there. first off, just understand that Java exists in pretty much any application where the developers prefer to use Java over other development platforms and libraries. So we see industrial control systems that have Java in them. And I think what we need to do is we need to look at it like if the application uses a web browser for interaction or user interaction, then it could possibly have some kind of a Java web app running in it. Industrial control systems are no exception. We've ever since the Web 2.0 days and beyond, we've moved past the thin clients and the applications that were installed directly on computer systems, and we've just gone to a browser-based interaction. So when we're talking about industrial control systems, there's a few components that we need to look at, specifically those that look a lot like a standard computer. One of them would be a human-machine interface or operator interface terminal. That's basically a computer that can control and view an industrial control network, process control network. Now that computer is something that an operator sits at or stands next to. It could be in a console, and it has a screen it could have a depiction of pipes and valves and all kinds of stuff on it. And it looks like it's made for purpose device, but at the same time, it's probably running Windows or Linux in the background, and it could have a Java app. Another type of device is an engineering workstation, almost exactly the same, but it has a lot more permissions, and you can actually modify the actual process or the industrial control configuration with it. Now, all of that kind of rolls up to some kind of a supervisory control or distributed control system, which uses computers and which has brought us into the modern age with industrial control networks. Those supervisor control systems typically are designed so that I can work from a remote operation center or an operations center and operate my equipment that's everywhere, located everywhere. Think about something that could be like hydroelectric or, power production or anything like that from a control room. Getting a little bit more back into the Log4j aspects of it, that goes back into the development of the actual application. And so developing applications for the SCADA, just like I had mentioned, DCS, distributed control systems, and so on, really falls back on the engineers and developers' preference. Then it also falls back on, do they actually find tools and libraries that are useful for what they're trying to do? Log4j adds a couple of usability options without having developed those on their own with regards to, like, for historians for logging and debugging and things like that. We'll probably talk about that a little bit later. But when those developers are actually building those process control systems or industrial control systems, and a lot of time I refer to them as process control systems because it's a big process, they're looking at developing that process. Some of these control systems can have up to 30,000 different controls. So think about developing 30,000 different controls and programming that into a control system. And each control could be like an on and off switch. It's like taking 30,000 relays and trying to map them all back to something, right? They're not focusing on how to develop a log or a debugging application. So if they find that library available, they're like, well, I can use this. I'm just going to include it in my system just like everything else. And I would say on the process control side, what we're seeing, especially after the release of Log4j, and then all the big OEMs and original equipment manufacturers and vendors coming on board and releasing the vulnerability in their systems publicly, we're seeing it's still pretty much about the same as web applications on the IT side. 25 to 30% of these applications are vulnerable to this specific Log4j vulnerability.
How hard is it to find these vulnerabilities? When I talk to people, they seem to be spending a lot more time looking for the vulnerability than they do fixing it. So what makes it so hard to find?
I think the most difficult thing about it is knowing where to look. So let's talk specifically about an industrial control system. I'm going to keep this in my wheelhouse. So we know that, what we've heard and what we've seen is that as soon as the vulnerability was released publicly, December 9th, there was a huge uptick in scans, whether it's nefarious or not. There's a huge uptick in scans on the web for this vulnerability. Because let's face it, the vulnerability is exposed through HTTP or HTTPS through a web console. Like you can access it that way. But on an industrial control system in that environment, sometimes we call it operational technology because that's kind of parallel with IT. In that environment, we don't even know if it exists because we're not always looking at that environment the same way we look at something connected to the internet. Additionally, in some things that I've mentioned before elsewhere, scanning in that environment is a very sensitive topic. So if I'm going to perform a scan in that environment, that scanning tool or technique has to be thoroughly tested in a representative environment in a lab to make sure that I don't interfere with the process. These days, and a lot of people don't realize this, cutting an Ethernet cable in a process control environment could be the same as cutting a power cable. It could essentially, when you break that communication, it could essentially shut something off, or depending on how it's programmed, it can make an engine overrun, or it can open and close valves. It could do all kinds of strange things, just because those protocols that are used in communication are so sensitive. But then there's also the process operational aspect of it, where I have a standard thing that I do. Let's say I'm a SCADA tech or I'm an operational person. I do this day in and day out. I follow a procedure. I make sure people are safe. I go home safely. I don't destroy the environment, cause a catastrophe, or destroy equipment, and still produce whatever I'm producing. And you're asking me to do something that I'm not used to doing. I need to have a quality process built into it. It needs to follow my management of change. It also needs to be approved by, in triplicate, and it takes an act of Congress to do that internally in the organization. A lot of red tape, a lot of procedural things, just to make sure that essentially, let's say it's a power grid, people don't lose their power.
Do you think that the OT teams, operational technology teams, are up to this cybersecurity challenge? Do they have the expertise? Because a lot of times we've heard historically that they don't, and that maybe some of this conversation is driving a convergence of the IT teams and the operational teams that's been going on for some time, or are they still very distinct?
The majority of them don't. And it's not to say that they're not good at and very good at what they do. But there's two parts of those teams that, in my experience and what I see most often, is still reading message boards and everything else. Two parts of those teams that are still trying to figure out how to work together. And this is, going back to the experience question. So the IT side of the team, usually when they're talking about supporting operational technology networks, the IT side of the team is looking at their network equipment, whatever kind of computers that they can support that aren't OEM or vendor specific. And they do it in that way. They follow the MOC processes and all that kind of stuff. The other side of the house is typically somebody who supports the actual SCADA system, the DCS system. They don't always know what the IT team does or how they use the tools that they use. Now, what they have to do is work together, and they have to take the IT tools, test them out, fully understand what they're doing, and then develop a process, a staged process for reviewing and scanning for this stuff in the network. I would say that a large corporation can do this. They probably have done this. WannaCry was out there. I remember we went through that. They've done these types of things, but mid-size and smaller, it's very unlikely that they can pull this together without external support.
Do you think the bad guys are getting better at exploiting this kind of thing faster? Are you seeing actual attacks that are looking for this particular vulnerability?
Yeah, so I think first off, let's look at how we're defining bad guys and the speed to exploitation. So everybody on the internet could be a bad guy, right? I could have, I could be using the onion router. I could have feelers out there that span thousands of people and be one bad guy. I mean, I don't even know that somebody's on my network using my network to do a bad thing. So yeah, the exploitation can happen much more quickly. Just because of that aspect of things. There are so many uncategorized threats out there right now that are just getting all kinds of funds under the table from state sponsorship, that it's basically it's going to get worse. There's really no way around that. It's anonymous, not the group, but there's anonymity. There's just no way to really control it. This is just a topic that is at the heart of things. How do you regulate that? It's global, it's worldwide. I think it's just going to get worse, honestly.
So things may get worse before they eventually get better, we hope. What is the ultimate challenge here that we're trying to get at? It seems like a lot of these systems are more targeted than ever by somebody. We don't know how many of them, but how long do they dwell? Are they kind of scanning these environments for some time before they attack, or are the attacks instantaneous? And it seems like the nature of the attacks are changing.
Yeah, I kind of like the old the cyber kill chain kind of methodology, right? So let's say I'm looking for just the people that don't do anything, and I know they're not doing anything, or want to put them on my list, right? I'm going to scan everything and perform reconnaissance. That's what's going to happen. There's going to be reconnaissance. So these uncategorized threat actors and advanced persistent threats, what they're doing is they're looking for people who aren't doing anything. And this type of a vulnerability is exploitable by not doing anything. As soon as you start doing something, it's harder to exploit. And that's they know that. After they do that, they're gonna establish their backdoors, and what they're gonna do is they're gonna start looking for ways to just continue that presence in the environment without by going undetected. And that's why I always say the basic thing to do is just be able to monitor that connection in and out of the environment. If you can check that a lot of times, then you're gonna solve a lot of your problems. And that takes very little effort as far as modifying your existing systems. Once they do that, then they're going to start looking at the dark web, or they're going to start looking at these databases and say, well, what kind of credentials can I come up with? Or can I just farm them myself? And then once they're farming credentials, they're just waiting for the right time. Like, now I'm here. Let's say I've got 100 different power supply stations. I'm ready to go. When do I need to do that? And then they just go back and go to the next thing. Okay, over here, I've got water treatment. Over there, I've got, oil production, whatever. So that is basically the mentality there. If they have 1,000 on their list and all of a sudden they get shut out of one of them, they still have 999. Maybe they'll look for more.
We hear a lot about cyber espionage these days. Are these attacks nation states, or are they cyber criminals who are just trying to do your classic kind of ransomware attack and hold the company for hostage? Or are we seeing more sophisticated attacks?
Well, they're highly sophisticated. So I wouldn't say that we can directly attribute them back to a nation state at all. I think that's the main issue. But what you can do is you can kind of follow the damage. And let's say there's a conflict going on that's public. You see it happening. We're not going to call it terrorism. We're going to say, okay, well, we can attribute that to a state. But they're not getting their point across. Historically, there's a cyber attack that directly follows that shuts it down. So when you look at it that way, not to get too political or what have you, those cyber attacks are usually attributed back to a nation state activity, but it's very difficult to attribute them back to a nation state. But what that means is they're probably highly funded. They probably do have a lot of funding. And so, we look at things like ransomware payouts, and those have been up in the $50 million range and plus. Things that you don't even hear about, ransomware payouts in the millions, and then the fact that they're getting funding, it's their daily jobs. I mean, they go to work every day behind their computer, dressed like this or in a t-shirt, and that's their jobs. They're getting paid by somebody, and probably a lot.
So it's not a hobby anymore, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are sets of best practices? I mean, you mentioned monitoring, but are there a set of things that you wish companies would do to kind of secure these environments more aggressively that would just make your life easier and them more secure?
Yeah, you have to start by doing something, and it's every day. Cybersecurity so we're talking about cyber, and cyber includes computers. computerized technologies. But cybersecurity is an everyday thing. It's a defensive thing that you do. It starts by knowing what you're protecting, defending against. What's core to my business and what's core to my operations. That's something that the company should do every day. So coming from initially more of a compliance background where I was getting inspected, or then I was helping people configure things to get inspected, I always kind of looked at it like the worst thing I could possibly see during an IG or during an audit was a just-in-time preparation. The one thing that a threat actor is going to look for is when things aren't getting done. So we can't take this just-in-time mentality. It's an all-the-time mentality, and I still see that. It's 2022. We still see that where companies just aren't doing the basics, and the basics are really just understanding what you have to protect, and then because everything's interconnected, understanding where the interconnections are, really understanding where those interconnections are before you make modifications, before you start changing those actual systems. Look for ways to protect them from outside intruders, and then look for ways to monitor for that activity. It doesn't take any change to the system itself. Vulnerability management is one of the hardest things to do in an industrial control environment. These systems are made to run 3 to 5 years. Now software updates and obsolescence makes it closer to 3 years without interruption. You cannot just go patch these systems. You can defend them though, and you can monitor them though. And that's kind of like the best practice to look for. Look for all the required remote access, make sure that is secure, and put a policy around that requires multi-factor authentication, obviously, which is still a challenge. But just because you have a couple of challenges and responses there, but also password updates. We usually say you really should be doing a review on accounts every 6 months at least, because they don't change. The environment doesn't change that much, but there is turnover. And updating the passwords just as often if you can, even on an industrial control environment, system networks.
We hear a lot about DevSecOps and other aspects of application development and deployment. Do you think that as a practice needs to be extended out to these systems as well? Because it seems like we're deploying software and then we're trying to update it with patches and trying to keep the whole thing secure on an end-to-end basis. So do we really need to rethink the whole life cycle?
Yeah, but that's an educational thing. So the life cycle that we're talking about is trying to make sure something is fit to operate for let's say 5-year term. And so what's going to happen in that 3 to 5 year term as far as like software vulnerabilities and threats? I mean, it's infinite, right? They're not looking at it that way. They're saying, okay, is this going to operate and function? And then also there's degradation in the process and the physical equipment, right? But there are periods in time when that stuff can get reviewed. It can get reviewed when it's developed. No, absolutely no question about it. You just have to add it to the budget. It can get reviewed when it's going through an acceptance test. If you already built it into when it's developed, just make sure that after that modification is made to ensure that it functions properly and it's safe, it gets reviewed again. And then it can get reviewed during a site acceptance test when it actually gets installed. And then just do periodic reviews after that. And I've done that before where if that system had a computer, a physical computer or a virtual computer, I would just replicate that system and then do vulnerability scans in a virtual environment, put together a list, and then we'd say, hey, OEM support person or vendor, this is the list of stuff that we need to make sure that you address. And then they would figure out ways to address it. It takes a budget, but that's one way to do it. So yeah, absolutely, it should be integrated. I think when you say that, though, a lot of the people that work in the environment that I work in aren't really going to understand what you're talking about. So we kind of align it to the management of change process and acceptance testing.
There you go. All right, folks, you heard it here first. Don't overlook those industrial control systems out there. There's lots of potential vulnerabilities, and Log4j may only be the one that we know about right now. Hey, Dennis, thanks for being on the show.
thank you for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, that rounds out today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed today's conversations. As always, just a couple things I want to remind you about before we close out today's show. We've got some great events coming up, both virtual and on-site, on-premise, live, in-person events. We've got coming up very, very quickly this week, as a matter of fact, the IBM Automation Insights virtual event. That one is happening February 23rd. So definitely, if automation is your bag, want to check that one out. After that, we have on March 1st, we have the Sneak Know Your Code Open Source and Supply Chain Summit. Very, very much a relevant topic these days, so want to check that one out as well. That's another day-long event. I think it's half day. Maybe it's day-long. I'm not quite sure, but it's definitely worth checking out. And then almost directly following that, on March 3rd, we have the SALT Security API Security Summit. I got to tell you, so many great security shows that we've got going on. You definitely want to check out all three of those because there's going to be something in there for you, I can guarantee you. We've also got some live events coming up on the horizon. Starting at the end of March, we have a couple Techstrong Live one-day events. The first ones are kicking off in Atlanta. The first one is March 29th. It is Techstrong Live DevOps Cloud Native. And then on March 30th, the next day, we have Techstrong Live Cybersecurity. So we have an amazing lineup of speakers, great agenda, and you can find out all the information on pretty much all of the events on techstrongevents.com. After the road shows, we call them road shows, but they're not really road shows. The Techstrong Live events, one-day events, we have them strategically located throughout the year in different cities around the country. So hopefully there'll be one that comes near you. We also have our Initech events that are going to be kicking off very, very shortly. We have Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, Washington, D.C. We're going to be out there, folks, with these conferences, and we surely hope that you can join us for those. As I said before, you can get information on all of our events, virtual and on-site, live in person, at techstrongevents.com. And just click on the upcoming events, and you can see the full lineup. Click on them. You can see the agenda, the speakers, and register for the events themselves. Do hope you can join us for at least one or two of the events throughout the year. I'll be at a lot of them, and so will the other folks here from Techstrong. So hope you can join us. I'll be back tomorrow with a brand new Techstrong TV broadcast. And so until then, I hope everybody has a great day. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.